They called her unstable. He called her paranoid. And while the world believed a billionaire husband's perfect lie, Ava smiled from inside a white-walled clinic and counted every stolen day. But the woman they buried in silence did not break. She built a reckoning. The morning she walked free, his empire began to fall. This is not a comeback story. It is a masterclass in patience, betrayal, and beautifully timed revenge.
For 3 years, they painted me as the unstable wife, the jealous one who couldn't handle his success. When I confronted my husband Liam about the affair, he had me committed, claiming my pregnancy was making me paranoid. My father in law, a man whose fortune I had tripled, told the doctors she's always been possessive. His mistress Sienna visited me once, her eyes full of false pity. He just needs someone who understands the pressure, she whispered. For 3 years in that sterile, white walled clinic, I didn't fight. I didn't scream. I smiled and complied. I did only one thing: I planned. The morning they signed my release papers, his $10 billion tech empire began to crumble. I'm so glad you've joined me for this. Leave a comment and tell me what city you're listening from. I'm making a world map of our community and I want you on it. Just a heads up, this story blends high stakes drama with crucial life lessons, crafted for emotional impact. Any similarity to real individuals is entirely coincidental, but the wisdom within this tale is a gift for you to take with you. The silk of the robe feels cold against my skin. I trace the rim of a porcelain teacup, a gift from my mother that the clinic allowed me to keep. 3 months ago, I let it slip, cracking it on the marble floor. Every night since, I've used a tiny shard to carve into the back of my mahogany headboard. The scratching is almost silent, a secret ritual, a single final line: 1095. I lean back, looking at the pattern hidden from the nurse's view, a meticulous record of betrayal, one mark for every single day I've been a prisoner in this gilded cage, Villa Crest Wellness Retreat. Every single day I have etched a reminder of why I'm here. Not because I'm unwell, but because my husband wanted me silenced. The automated blinds were open, revealing a view of the Seattle skyline. It's January and a cold mist hangs over the water. My roommate, a quiet woman named Elena, is still asleep, her back to me. She's here for exhaustion, they say. She's the only person who has shown me any real kindness. I run my thumb over the last sharp groove in the wood. Tomorrow at 9 in the morning, a town car will come for me. And by lunch, Liam Vance will realize his world is built on a foundation of sand. I sit at the antique desk and unlock my tablet. It's the only device they allow, heavily monitored, but they don't monitor the encrypted drafts in my email, saved under a folder labeled Garden Plans. 127 pages. I call it the Scorched Earth Protocol. It took me 3 years to compile. Every backchannel deal Marcus will expose, every account he will seize, every brilliant idea Liam stole from me that I'm going to reclaim, piece by piece, until he's left with nothing but the truth of what he did. I scroll through it one last time. Phase 1: the injunction: file for divorce and freeze all marital and corporate assets within 6 hours of my release. Phase 2: the aura leak: release the original source code for our flagship software, proving my authorship. Phase 3: the Sienna Papers: expose the $50 million fund Liam secretly established for her using diverted company profits. I know every byte of data by heart. I've reread these files so many times the words are burned into my memory. But I can't take the tablet with me. Clinic rules: all data is wiped upon discharge. I'm not leaving them a digital trail of the storm that's coming. So I'm going to erase it myself. At 7:30, the soft chime for breakfast sounds. "Ava, your attorney is on the video line," a nurse says through the door. I glance at Elena. She's awake, watching me with knowing eyes. "The shark?" she asks softly. "Yes," I reply. She nods. "Eat him alive, honey." I meet her gaze. Elena rarely speaks, but she sees everything. She's watched me for months, a silent ally in this quiet war. She knows I'm not crazy. "Thank you," I say. "Don't ever look back." I almost smile. I won't. The video call room is minimalist and white. I tap the screen and Marcus Thorne's face appears. He's in his 50s, with the sharp, merciless eyes of a predator. He's the only lawyer in Seattle feared by billionaires. He took my case because he smelled blood in the water. He didn't just believe I was sane, he knew I was a weapon waiting to be aimed. Marcus, tomorrow, 9 a.m., I say. The car will be waiting, he confirms, his voice a low growl. Everything is primed, the motions are ready to be filed. Dr. Chen has the psychiatric evaluation ready to counterfile the second they try to contest your competence. As soon as you're clear of that place, we launch. I close my eyes, picturing it. Liam in his glass walled office overlooking the city, the one I designed. He'll be laughing with his team, planning a future that doesn't include me. Then his paralegal will rush in, handing him a court order. All assets, personal and corporate, are frozen. An emergency hearing has been scheduled. He will never see it coming. He's too arrogant to expect it, I say. Arrogance is a liability, Marcus replies. We have 15 minutes, recite the timeline for the source code leak. I do. I detail the plan, the offshore servers, the anonymous tech journalist who will receive the drop. Marcus listens, unblinking. He asks two clarifying questions. I have the answers. When the timer on the screen shows 2 minutes remaining, he says, Get some rest, Ava. Tomorrow we dismantle an empire. I've been dismantling it in my head for 3 years, I tell him. Tomorrow, I just press the button. I end the call before he can respond. Back in my room, I open the tablet and begin the deep wipe procedure. Elena stands by the door humming softly, a subtle signal if a nurse approaches. All clear? I ask. As glass, she murmurs. Do it. I sit on the floor and initiate the 7-pass erase. The progress bar crawls across the screen. 3 years of evidence, of rage, of meticulously crafted revenge, turning into unusable data. I watch until the process completes. The screen glows with the factory reset menu. It's clean, empty. Elena turns from the door. Feel lighter? She asks. Yes, I say, and it's the truest word I've spoken in years. It's all in here now. I tap my temple, every password, every account number, every hidden detail. I didn't need the file anymore. I just needed the focus of building it. That night I lie in bed staring at the ceiling. The clinic is always unnaturally quiet. The hushed footsteps of the night staff, the distant hum of the air filtration. But tonight it feels like the calm before a hurricane. Tomorrow I am free. Tomorrow Liam Vance will learn what a woman he scorned is capable of. He thought this place would break me. He thought I'd emerge a docile, medicated shell, grateful for his care. He thought he had won. He was so wrong. I close my eyes and picture his face. My husband, the man who stole my company, my freedom, and my life. The man who whispered he loved me while he was planning my erasure. He has no idea of the reckoning that is coming for him. But he will. But before you see me take back everything he stole, you need to understand how we got here. You need to know how I was the architect of his success, how I became the most sought-after marketing mind in the tech world, how I loved my husband, and how he used that love to destroy me. 7 years ago, I had it all. My name is Ava Reed, and I'm a brand strategist. Or I used to be. I graduated from Stanford in 2015 with an MBA and a thesis on disruptive marketing that got me offers from every major tech firm in Silicon Valley. I said no to all of them. I wanted to build something new from the ground up in Seattle. Liam didn't come to my graduation. He was closing a deal. He sent a bouquet of roses. That night he called from a hotel bar, the sound of laughter loud in the background. It's a shame you're so brilliant, babe, he'd said, his words slightly slurred. If you were just a little less intimidating, you'd be perfect. I was 26 years old. I had just been named valedictorian of one of the most competitive programs in the world. And my boyfriend's first thought was that my intelligence was a flaw. I didn't get sad. I got motivated. I decided I would build a brand so powerful he'd have no choice but to respect me. I co founded Aura Technologies with him in the fall of 2016. We worked from a cramped WeWork office with a view of a brick wall. He was the coder, the visionary, I was the strategist, the one who sold the vision. The office had a broken coffee machine, a flickering fluorescent light, and a whiteboard that was perpetually covered in my campaign flows. I didn't mind. I had a laptop, a cell phone, and a belief in what we were creating. Our first major client was a logistics company that needed a complete software overhaul. I worked 20-hour days for 4 months, sleeping on the office couch. When we landed the contract, Liam cried. He said I was the most incredible person he had ever met. That one success led to three more. By 2018, we had moved into a high rise downtown overlooking Puget Sound. We had 40 employees. We had 16 major accounts. We had a skyrocketing valuation, and I had a ring on my finger. Liam Vance was 7 years older than me. He'd graduated from a state college with a computer science degree and had spent years as a freelance coder. Brilliant, but directionless. When we launched Aura, he told everyone I was his secret weapon. 2 years after we got married, just after we found out I was pregnant, he asked me to take a step back and become a silent partner. I should have seen it for what it was, but he was my husband, and our doctor had been worried about my stress levels. Liam said it in that careful, loving way he had perfected. He said it was for the baby, for our family, for me. He just wanted to take care of me. And so I agreed. I brought Marcus into my company, Aura Innovations, back in 2019. I made him Chief Operating Officer, gave him a corner office with a view of the bay, and put him in charge of three major accounts. In less than 6 months, it was clear I'd made a mistake. He missed key deliverable dates. He drove away clients with his dismissive attitude. He approved software builds that were riddled with bugs, were inefficient, were insecure, and then he'd blame the engineering team when the system crashed. I was spending more of my time managing his failures than I was doing my own job, but I never fired him. Every time the thought crossed my mind, I'd picture his father, Edward, shaking his head. Family is everything, Amelia. Those Sunday dinners at the Atherton estate were a non-negotiable family ritual. His mother would prepare a lavish meal, and his father would select a vintage bottle from his cellar. Marcus was always there, basking in the attention, while I sat beside him, pregnant with our first child. My best friend Liam, our lead architect, would sometimes show up late, still buzzing with ideas from the office. I went out of a sense of duty, but the joy had long since faded. One evening in the spring of 2020, I went to find the powder room and walked by Edward's study. The heavy oak door was slightly ajar. I could hear their voices. Marcus should be the CEO, Edward said, his voice firm. He's the man of the house. Clients take that seriously. She built the company from nothing, dear, his mother replied, her tone soft and hesitant. She caught a lucky break, his father countered. Marcus has the right instincts. He just needs to be given the chance to lead. I stood there in the quiet hall, my hand resting on the cool wood of the door frame, feeling a fracture form deep inside my chest. I didn't say a word. I just returned to the dining table, pushed food around my plate, and we drove back to the city in a tense silence. I never told Marcus what I heard, but I began to carefully wall him off from the company's most critical project, Nexus. Then, in March of 2021, Wired magazine published a feature on tech innovators. The cover read, "The Queen of Silicon Valley, Amelia Hayes and the Future of Smart Cities." It featured a full-page photo of me standing in our main server farm, surrounded by the humming, blinking heart of my creation. The writer called my work visionary, bold, and hailed me as one of the most important minds in modern technology. I brought a copy of the magazine to dinner that Sunday. Marcus was already there, nursing a glass of whiskey. He glanced at the cover, read the headline, and tossed it onto the table without comment. But I saw the way his knuckles turned white as he gripped his glass. His jaw was a hard line. He never congratulated me. He didn't acknowledge it at all. That fall, I was nominated for the Golden Spire Award, the highest honor in our industry. The gala was held in October at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. My mother in law picked out a new gown for the occasion. Liam even wore a tuxedo. Marcus came, of course, with his wife, me. His father declined, citing a last minute business trip to Tokyo. I won. When my name was called, I felt a shock go through me. I walked to the stage, accepted the heavy gold plated trophy, and gave a brief speech, thanking my incredible team, our partners, and my family. My eyes scanned the crowd and found Marcus in the fifth row. He was on his feet, clapping with the rest of them, but his eyes were like chips of ice. Later that night, standing in the grand lobby, I watched my family prepare to leave. His mother hugged me, whispering how proud she was. Liam gave me a bear hug and said, "You deserve every bit of this." And Marcus, he was the last one to approach me. He stopped right in front of me, his gaze fixed on the trophy in my hands. "Enjoy the moment," he said, his voice low. "It won't last." I didn't know exactly what he meant then, but I should have, because that was the night my husband decided to burn my world to the ground. The alert came on November 5th, 2023, at 2:13 in the morning. That alert was the beginning of the end. The notification was just a cold automated message. I was in my home office overlooking the city, my phone chiming at 2:13 a.m. I hadn't been able to sleep, my mind racing about the launch, now just hours away. I was 4 months pregnant, standing by the window with a glass of water, watching the fog roll in. It was November 5th, a Tuesday, damp and cold, the kind of night where the silence feels heavy. "Anomaly detected," the message read. "Security Core Epsilon 7. No other details, just those 4 words. I felt the baby kick, a sharp jab as my stomach plummeted. Epsilon 7 was the encrypted heart of our Nexus platform, a revolutionary smart city operating system. It was the most ambitious project Aura Innovations had ever attempted, a $500 million venture. Our entire reputation was on the line. "What kind of anomaly?" I whispered. I tried pinging Marcus, but he was offline. He was supposed to be doing the final overnight system check. I grabbed my laptop, my keys, and I drove to the office, running every yellow light on the way. I got there at 2:45 a.m. The office tower was a dark monolith, a silent skeleton of steel and glass. A handful of engineers were in the operations center, their faces lit by the glow of their monitors. I swiped my access card and walked through the main doors. Kenji Tanaka, my head of cybersecurity, met me by the entrance. He was a solid, unflappable man in his late 40s who had seen everything. I trusted him implicitly. "Amelia," he said, his voice strained, "we have a problem. Where is Marcus?" "He logged out an hour ago, said he was going home for a few hours of sleep." That stopped me. Marcus never left before a major launch. He loved the pre-dawn pressure. "Show me," I said. We walked to the main console bay. The ride up in the silent elevator was agonizing. When we reached the operations floor, I saw it, a back door. Someone had planted a vulnerability deep inside the system's core. "What's going on?" Marcus asked, walking out from a side office. His face was a mask of concern. "What do you mean, what's going on? Where have you been?" He gestured vaguely. "Just running a final diagnostic. The code? It has been altered." I pulled up the primary code repository on my tablet, my fingers trembling slightly as I compared the current build to the master version I had personally signed off on 2 weeks prior. He was right, the code was different, but the digital signature on the commit log was mine. It had been forged. "I didn't authorize this change," I said, my voice barely a whisper. He shrugged. "I found a weakness in the encryption. I patched it. We saved ourselves a major embarrassment." I felt my blood turn to ice. "You what? You pushed an unauthorized patch to the core security module hours before launch?" It was a necessary fix, he said, as if explaining something to a child. We're more secure now. You can't just alter the foundation of the system without my approval. My voice was rising, echoing in the quiet room. Kenji took a half step back, his gaze shifting between us. This is my project, Marcus. My design, my liability. If this platform fails, it won't fail, he said coolly. You don't know that. A junior engineer walked past, carrying a fresh pot of coffee. The air was thick with tension. I turned to Kenji. Kill it. Take the entire system offline right now. Amelia, don't overreact, Marcus started, taking a step toward me. Now, I screamed. Kenji nodded grimly, and his hands flew to the keyboard, initiating the emergency shutdown sequence. But it was too late. At 3:16 a.m., the attack began. It wasn't a crack, it was a flood. Alarms blared, turning the room into a cacophony of digital screams. Red warning lights flashed across every monitor. The back door wasn't a patch, it was a wide open gate. The system began hemorrhaging proprietary data at an impossible rate. Lock it down, I yelled. I ran for the primary server rack to initiate a hard manual disconnect, but the stress, the fear, the betrayal, it all hit me at once. A dizzy spell washed over me, a sharp, cramping pain seizing my abdomen. I stumbled, my balance gone. My head struck the sharp corner of a server chassis. I felt a blinding electric pain, and then the world collapsed into darkness, the sound of the alarms fading into a distant wail. When I opened my eyes, Kenji was kneeling over me, his face pale. The air was filled with the acrid smell of burning plastic. My head throbbed. I pushed myself up. My hand went to my belly. The baby, I started. You're bleeding a little, he said gently. I've called an ambulance. I looked past him at the main display wall. The data breach was a massacre, and there, listed under compromised accounts, were the names of our three anchor clients. Their data, their secrets, their entire digital infrastructures were gone, stolen. John Chen, 45 years old, CEO of a global shipping company. He had a wife and two young sons. Maria Flores, 52, transit commissioner. She was a widow who lived with her elderly mother. Ben Carter, 34, a rising star who had staked his career on our partnership. I knew them all personally. I crawled to the nearest workstation, my hands shaking too badly to type. There was so much red on the screen. It looked like digital blood. And I kept whispering, this can't be real, this can't be happening. But it was. I looked at the timestamp on the initial breach, 3:16 a.m. The first official news alerts went out at 3:41 a.m. Media, FBI, industry regulators. The site was about to be flooded. Someone helped me to my feet and guided me toward a small conference room. A paramedic was already on his way up, but I couldn't focus on his questions. I just sat there, staring through the glass wall at the digital carnage, at the wreckage of my life's work. 3 careers, 3 good people were utterly ruined because of me, because I had trusted my husband. Julian was speaking with a health inspector. My husband Liam stood by the restaurant's glass doors, his phone pressed to his ear. My kitchen staff huddled together, some of them in tears. I watched a woman in a sharp blazer walk past Richard Monroe, the lead investigator. She shot me a pitying look before moving on. I thought about the bad batch of oysters, about Liam's voice on the phone that morning, unnaturally steady, about the fact he'd dropped by the kitchen at 6 a.m., hours before our brunch rush, about the last-minute supplier change he'd insisted on without my final say. The 3 people were in critical condition. But that wasn't my supplier. Liam knew that. The investigators came to our penthouse 3 hours later. They questioned me while I was still reeling from the shock. I was curled up on the sofa in our living room when Inspector Davies walked in. He was a stern man in his early 50s, tailored suit, no warmth, with a kind of expression that had seen too much corporate negligence. He presented his credentials and introduced himself. Then he sat opposite me and asked me to recount what had occurred. I explained everything. I told him about the frantic call at 6:47 in the morning, about arriving at the restaurant to find Liam already there, about the spoiled oysters, about the supplier change Liam had pushed through without my approval, about the moment I realized something was terribly wrong, about the collapse of my restaurant's reputation, about the three diners who were now fighting for their lives. Inspector Davies documented it all. He nodded. He posed clarifying questions and then he asked, "Who authorized the purchase order for the new supplier?" I paused. Liam initiated it. I never gave the final approval. "But your company is the sole proprietorship on record," Davies stated. "So someone had to sign off on the invoice before it was submitted for payment. That's protocol." "I understand," I said, "but I did not authorize that payment. Liam must have." Davies pulled a tablet from his briefcase and slid it across the coffee table. It was a digital invoice. The purchase order for the spoiled oysters, the unauthorized supplier, the one that had caused the poisonings. At the bottom in the digital signature field was my name, my unique electronic signature. My authorization, I just stared at it. "Whose authorization is this?" Davies asked. "That's mine," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "But I never signed that." Davies's expression remained unchanged. "Miss Chevalier, this document was logged in your system 6 months ago. It has your digital signature. It has your business license number. Are you claiming you didn't authorize it? I am telling you, I never saw that invoice before today." He leaned back, unimpressed. "Then how did your e-signature get on it?" I had no explanation. They stayed at my home for another 2 hours. The shock had given way to a splitting headache. 7 years of building my culinary empire gone in an instant. I had a severe migraine. They suggested I see a doctor, but I declined. I needed to get to my office. I needed to locate the original invoices. I called Marco, my sous chef, from my personal study. He picked up on the second ring. "Ava." "Oh, thank God. Are you all right?" "I heard about the restaurant." "Marco, I need you to do something for me." My voice trembled. "Get to the restaurant, log into my computer, find the original supplier invoices for the Gold Coast project, the ones I filed in April. I have to have those files." "Okay, I am on my way now." And Marco, I stopped. "Do not let Liam know." There was a weighted silence on the other end of the line. "Ava," Marco said softly, "what is happening? Just locate the files." Marco called me back 40 minutes later. "They are gone," he said. I felt the ground disappear beneath me. "What do you mean they are gone?" "The files are not on your desktop." I checked the cloud storage. I checked the main server. They are not anywhere. They have been deleted. That is impossible. We have redundant backups. Everything is archived. "Someone wiped them," Marco said, "and they wiped the backups as well." I shut my eyes. My head was throbbing. "Marco, who has administrative access to the main server. You, me, and Liam?" "Of course." Inspector Davies called me at 1:30 in the afternoon and requested I come down to the department's main office to provide a formal statement. I informed him I would be there in 20 minutes. I was not being charged, not yet, but I could sense it was imminent. The Department of Health was an imposing glass building on LaSalle Street. Davies met me in the lobby and escorted me down a sterile corridor to a small room with a table, two chairs, and a one-way mirror on the wall. I knew what that mirror was. I had watched enough dramas to know there were people observing from the other side. Davies sat down across from me. He activated a recording device and informed me of my rights. I willed myself to be calm. I told myself I had done nothing wrong, but my hands were trembling. Davies asked me the same questions he had asked at my home. I provided him with the same answers, and then he said, "Miss Chevalier, we have been speaking with other involved parties. Your husband, Liam Chevalier, gave us a statement this morning." I looked up. "What did he say?" Davies checked his notes. He said he brought up concerns about your cost-cutting measures 3 weeks ago. He said he sent you an email suggesting you consult with a financial advisor before changing suppliers. He said you told him the profit margins wouldn't allow it. I felt the color drain from my face. "That is a lie." "We have the email," Davies said. "It is dated September 22nd. It was sent from Liam Chevalier's corporate account to yours. I never saw that email. It is in your primary inbox." I stared at him. "That is impossible. He is lying. He must have faked it." "Miss Chevalier," Davies said, "3 people are in the hospital. We have a signed invoice with your name on it. We have an email that shows you were warned about the supplier's poor reputation. We have a statement from your own husband saying you ignored his concerns. He leaned forward. Help me make sense of this. What piece of the puzzle am I missing? I couldn't form words because I finally understood. Liam had not just changed the supplier, he had planned this. He had forged my digital signature. He had erased the original records. He had fabricated emails. He had framed me for criminal negligence, and he had done it flawlessly. They suspended my business license. At 2:47 in the afternoon, Davies stood up and said, Ivor Chevalier, your food handler and business licenses are suspended indefinitely pending a criminal investigation. He read me the official notice. Another official came in and handed me a thick envelope of paperwork. The paper felt cold. I did not protest. I did not say a word. I just sat there, staring at the wall as they escorted me out of the room and down the corridor toward the lobby. And then I saw the news vans. There were journalists waiting outside the building. A dozen of them, perhaps more, with cameras and microphones. Someone must have alerted them. They began yelling questions the second I walked through the door. Miss Chevalier, did you knowingly serve contaminated food? Do you have a comment for the victims' families? Were you trying to save money? The official holding my elbow guided me forward. I kept my gaze fixed on the ground. The cameras flashed. I heard the constant click, click, click of shutters, the whir of broadcast cameras. This was my public execution. They were parading me before the media as if I were already convicted. I thought about the victims, the people who had come to my restaurant for a beautiful meal. They would see this on the news tonight. They would see my face. They would believe I had poisoned them. And maybe in the eyes of the law, I had. They put me in a taxi and I went to a hotel, not wanting to face Liam. I sat in silence, staring out the window. We drove past my restaurant, Aria, on North Rush Street, the beautiful corner building I had poured my life into. I looked up. Through the window, I could see Liam inside, talking to his lawyers. He was looking out at the street, watching the traffic, watching me pass, and he was smiling. It was not a big smile, just a small, triumphant curl of his lips, but I saw it. That smile confirmed everything. He had orchestrated this, every single step. The forged invoice, the deleted records, the fabricated email, the phone call this morning timed perfectly so I would be the one to face the fallout. The 3 ruined lives, he had engineered all of it, and I had walked straight into his snare. I thought my family would support me. I thought my parents would believe my innocence. I thought someone would stand with me and say, Ava would never do this. I was mistaken. The hotel room smelled like lemon cleaner and loneliness. I had been there for 5 days when my mother came to visit. I sat in the hotel lounge on a stiff armchair, staring out the window at the city that had once been mine. The room was decorated in shades of gray. The recessed lighting hummed softly. There were a few other guests in the lounge, speaking in hushed tones. When my mother entered, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. I thought she was there to tell me she believed in me. I thought she was there to say she had hired a lawyer, that she had spoken with Liam, that she knew I was incapable of such a thing. I was mistaken. She sat down in the chair across from me. She looked tired. Her face was drawn, her eyes puffy from crying. She looked much older than I had ever seen her. Ava, she said. I leaned forward, desperate. Mom, thank God you are here. I need you to, if you made an error in judgment. She cut me off. You have to own up to it. I felt the air leave my lungs. What? Liam explained the whole situation to me. She said her voice was soft, full of misplaced sympathy. He said you have been under immense pressure. He said you have been working 16-hour days, especially with the baby coming. He said perhaps you just forgot you authorized the new supplier. It happens, my dear. You were exhausted. You made an error. I felt like she had slapped me. Mom, I did not sign that invoice. Liam forged my signature. He deleted the real records. He set me up. She just shook her head. Amelia, that's your brother. Leo would never do something like that. He did. Sweetheart, I know you're terrified, but blaming Leo won't fix anything. You have to speak with your attorney. You have to find a way to make this right. I just stared at her. Mom, 3 technicians are dead. Leo killed them. He sabotaged the building's core software. He used my credentials to do it. And you want me to take responsibility? Her eyes welled with tears. I don't know what else to do. You could say you believe me. She didn't. She put the phone down, got up, and walked out of that visitation room without a single glance back. 2 days later, my father and Leo arrived to see me together. I should have understood what that meant. My father sat in the chair across from me. Leo stood just behind him, arms folded, his face a perfect mask of concern. My father lifted the receiver. Amelia, he said, no greeting, no kindness, just my name. Dad, this entire thing is a nightmare, he said. The press is eviscerating the firm's reputation. Our clients in Chicago are backing out of major contracts. The board is discussing dissolving the company. A wave of fury washed over me. 3 people are dead, and all you care about is the company's image. I care about our survival, he shot back. Thorn Innovations has 62 employees. Those people have children. They have homes. If this firm goes under, they all go down with it. Then help me prove I'm innocent. He shook his head. Leo is stepping in as interim CEO. He will calm the investors. He will manage the clients. He will do what's necessary to ensure the firm survives. I looked past him at Leo. He was watching me with that same chillingly calm, triumphant look he had when he watched the police cruiser pull away from our office building with me in the back. You can't do that, I said. I'm the majority shareholder. You're in jail, my father stated flatly. You can't lead a tech company from in here. I own 51% of the shares. You can't just steal it from me. We're not stealing it, Leo said. His voice was so soft, so reasonable. We're just asking you to sign over your shares to me. Temporarily, of course, until this whole mess is sorted out. I laughed. The sound was brittle and empty. You're out of your mind if you think for 1 second I'm giving you my company. It stopped being your company, my father said, the moment you destroyed it. I slammed the phone back onto its cradle. That night, I called Ethan Reed from a payphone in the jail's common area. I had used nearly all of my commissary funds for a 5-minute call. He picked up on the third ring. Amelia, Ethan, I need you to be my lawyer. There was a heavy silence on the line. I can't. What? Your accounts are all frozen? He said a court order came down this afternoon. Your business assets, your private funds, everything. I can't take your case without payment. But you promised you would help me. I said I would help if it was possible, but I have a firm to run, Amelia. I have my own bills. I'm sorry, he disconnected. I stood there in that hallway, clutching the dead receiver and staring at the grimy concrete wall. I had no attorney, no money, and no family. I was completely alone. The court gave me a public defender the next day. His name was David Chen. He was 29 years old, looked like he hadn't slept in a week, and wore a suit that was a size too big. We met in a tiny, airless conference room at the jail. He tossed a thick stack of files onto the table and slumped into the chair opposite me. I'm currently juggling 87 active cases, he said. I'm not going to sugarcoat this for you, Miss Thorne. I don't have the resources for a major fight. The prosecution's evidence is overwhelming. The final software patch was deployed using your security credentials. You were the project lead. 3 men died from a catastrophic system failure. If this goes to a jury trial, you will lose. I didn't authorize that patch, I said. Can you prove that? No. The original command logs were wiped. Then our only option is to negotiate a plea agreement. A plea agreement? I stared at him in disbelief. I am innocent. That doesn't matter, Chen said bluntly. What matters is what a jury will believe. And right now, a jury is going to believe you are guilty. He was gone 20 minutes later. He never even took a single note. Julian came to visit the following week. He showed up alone, late in the day, when the visitation area was nearly deserted. He sat down across the partition and picked up the phone. Amelia, he said, his voice low. I believe you. Tears burned the corners of my eyes. Julian, I know Leo did this, he said. I don't know the how of it yet, but I know, and I am going to help you. How? I don't know for sure, but I'm going to find out. He glanced over his shoulder, then leaned in closer to the thick glass. I just need you to buy me some time. Can you hang on? I nodded slowly. Yeah, I can hang on. He hung up the phone, but just before he left, he pressed his palm flat against the glass. I mirrored the gesture on my side. That night, I sat on the edge of my cot in my cell and just stared at the wall. I thought about my mother telling me to accept the consequences. I thought about my father demanding I sign over my own company. I thought about Leo standing right behind him, smiling that quiet smile. I thought about the three men who died, Marcus, Ben, and Carlos, and I thought about the 3,650 days I was about to spend in this place. I took out the plastic knife I had sharpened to a point against the concrete floor and dug it into the wall. One scratch, day one. 3,649 more to go. I stopped praying for someone to rescue me. I stopped hoping my family would come to their senses. I started to plan my revenge. The trial started on January 10th, 2022. It was the coldest day of the year. 4 weeks. That's all it took the jury to ruin my life. But I committed every lie, every word, and every person who sat on that stand and perjured themselves to memory. I would need all of it later. The courtroom was a circus. Reporters crammed into the back rows, and the victims' families sat right up front. Maria Vega, Marcus's widow, sat 3 rows behind the prosecutor, clutching a wad of tissues. She never once looked in my direction. I sat beside David Chen. He'd tried his best, but his best was never going to be good enough. Prosecutor Harding was 45, sharp as a tack, and utterly merciless. In her opening statement, she pointed directly at me and declared, "This is a case about hubris, about a woman who built a tech empire and decided the rules of safety no longer applied to her. A woman who cut corners, ignored safety protocols, and put profits ahead of people. Because of her choices, 3 men are gone forever." I remained perfectly still. I had quickly learned that any display of emotion would be twisted and used against me. Leo took the stand on day 3. He wore a gray suit with a blue tie, his expression one of profound sadness. He looked every bit the part of the perfect grieving brother. Prosecutor Harding asked him about me. "Amelia is brilliant," Leo said, his voice soft with what sounded like pain. "She built Thorn Innovations from the ground up. But over the last year, I became concerned. She was putting in 16-hour days. She was barely sleeping. She was obsessed with proving herself, proving she was just as capable as our father. I recorded every single word in my mind." Harding asked if he had ever voiced concerns about the building's automated support system. Yes. 3 weeks before the collapse, I sent her a formal memo recommending we bring in an outside security auditor. I was worried that the budget restrictions were compromising safety protocols. And how did Miss Thorne respond? She told me we didn't have the budget for it. She said I was being paranoid. That was a lie. I mentally underlined it twice. David did the cross-examination. "Mr. Thorne, do you have any background in software engineering?" "No." "So you are not actually qualified to assess if a system's code is safe?" "No. But I know when something feels wrong, and yet you never reported these concerns to the city's oversight committee." Leo paused for effect. I trusted my sister to handle it. David sat down. He had barely landed a punch. My father took the stand on day 7. He looked older, more frail. He refused to look at me. Harding asked him to describe me. "Amelia has always been ambitious," he said, his voice monotone. "She always had to be the best. I think she felt she had something to prove, being a woman in such a male-dominated industry. Did this ambition ever worry you?" "At times. She could be reckless. She would take on projects that were too grand, too complex. I warned her about the Sky Spire Tower. I told her the tech was too new, too untested. She wouldn't listen. Another lie. I memorized the texture and shape of it. My mother took the stand on day 9. She wept through her entire testimony. Harding asked if she believed I was capable of criminal negligence. My mother finally looked at me, her eyes bloodshot, her hands trembling. I love my daughter, she sobbed. But three men are no longer with us. Three families have been shattered. If Amelia made a terrible mistake, then she must accept what comes next. I didn't shed a tear, I just held her gaze. She was the first to look away. I filed the memory away for later. I knew it would be useful. Our CFO, Vanessa, took the stand on day 11. She came armed with financial charts. She testified that I had been panicked about money, that I had fought with Leo over budget shortfalls, and that I had explicitly ordered cost cutting measures. I made a note of each claim. I knew which parts were true and which were twisted. Kenji Tanaka, the city's tech compliance officer, testified on day 13. He claimed I had bullied him into signing off on the system. He said I was pushy and hostile. I knew the real story. Leo had wired $85,000 to his offshore account, but I had no way to prove it. Not yet. I watched his every move. The way he couldn't make eye contact, the way his fingers nervously drummed on the wood of the witness box. I would remember. I took the stand on day 16. David asked me to tell my story. I told the unvarnished truth. Leo had stolen my credentials and deployed a corrupted software patch. The master logs had been erased. The signature on the final approval directive was not mine. I was framed. Jennifer Harding rose for her cross-examination. Miss Thorne, if the command logs were falsified, where are the original versions? They were erased. By whom? By my brother, Leo. Do you have any proof of that? No. Do you possess any evidence at all that your brother framed you? The files were wiped from the server. That in itself is evidence. Or, Harding countered, you deleted them yourself to cover your own tracks. I did not. 7 months pregnant, standing under the glittering chandeliers of the gallery, I felt a familiar unease. My husband, Julian, a man who could charm a vulture off its prey, was holding court. Then his phone lit up. I saw the name, Chloe, just for a second before he angled it away. It's the London office, he murmured, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. A crisis, as always. That was the first lie. It was small, almost insignificant, but it planted a seed of doubt that started to grow in the dark. The doubt festered. It was confirmed a week later by a receipt from Cartier tucked into his coat pocket. A diamond tennis bracelet, a gift I never received. Purchased on the same night he was supposedly closing a deal in Singapore. I sat in the nursery we had just finished, surrounded by soft grays and yellows, and felt the baby kick. The irony was suffocating. I was building a family while he was building a second life. There was no more doubt, only the cold, hard certainty of betrayal. I hired a private investigator. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday. Inside were glossy photos of Julian leaving a boutique hotel in the West Village. His arm wrapped around a woman half my age. She was beautiful, of course, and around her wrist was my diamond bracelet. The world didn't shatter, it simply rearranged itself into a new, terrifying shape. My mother screamed when I told her. My best friend, Liam, sat in stunned silence. But I felt nothing, just a quiet, chilling resolve. He thought he had all the power. I was about to prove him wrong. The first mark on the calendar was the day the photos arrived. By day 100, my grief had hardened into a plan. The family law section of the bookstore became my new church. On day 1, I didn't make a plan. I cried. I lay in our 4-poster bed, staring at the ornate ceiling, and cried until my body ached. Liam, my oldest friend, didn't offer advice. He just turned off the lights and let the grief come. I thought about the baby, about our vows, about the families at our wedding who thought our love was a fairy tale. I cried until there was nothing left but an empty space inside me. On day 30, my mother called, begging me to confront him. I stared at the phone for 10 minutes after we hung up. Then I deleted her message. Liam watched me from across the kitchen island. He didn't ask why. He already knew. On day 100, Liam asked me what I was going to do. We were sitting on my balcony after dark. The city lights a silent, glittering audience. I told him everything. The late nights, the secret credit card bills, the Cartier bracelet, the hotel. He listened, his jaw tight. When I finished, he said, he thinks he'll get away with it. I know, I replied. Are you going to let him? I didn't know how to answer. I had his money, but he had the power, the lawyers, the reputation. I was just Ava Sterling, inmate number one in a gilded cage, serving a life sentence I didn't choose. On day 150, Liam said, You need to fight back. How? I asked. I'm pregnant, I have no leverage. Then get some. He made it sound so simple, but I didn't know where to start. On day 200, I discovered Julian's home office. It was a sleek minimalist room I rarely entered, but in the back corner of his desk on a bottom drawer, I found a set of financial files he thought were hidden. I took 3 of them that night: corporate holdings, private equity, offshore accounts. I read them at night in the guest room with a small reading light, while Julian slept down the hall. I took notes on a yellow legal pad. I memorized account numbers, shell corporations, transaction dates. By day 400, I had read over 50 files. I knew more about his business than he thought. I understood how he hid his money. I understood how he had built his perfect lie. Eleanor Vance, my late father's estate attorney, was 67 years old with silver hair and a mind like a steel trap. She had been a prosecutor before going into private practice. She noticed the nature of my questions during a call about my trust fund. One afternoon, she met me for coffee. You're building a case, aren't you? She said. It wasn't a question. Yes. She started sending me articles and precedents, information on forensic accounting, corporate law, and asset forfeiture. She never asked who the target was. She just smiled and said, Knowledge is leverage, my dear. On day 500, I wrote a check to a forensic accountant Eleanor had recommended. I told him I was doing due diligence for a potential investment. I asked him to be discreet. I sent it on a Monday, then I waited. He didn't call. On day 550, the accountant, Mr. Cross, requested a meeting. He sat across from me in a quiet cafe, his face grim. I got your file, he said, and I took a look at the public records for these corporations. There's more here than you think. I felt something crack open in my chest. Hope? The dangerous kind? The kind that could destroy you if you let it. On day 600, I received a package from Cross. The courier service marked it as estate planning documents. Inside was a full report. He asked me if I knew about the property in the Cayman Islands, a beachfront villa, purchased 2 years ago. I understood immediately. He was asking if I knew where. Every transaction Julian approved, every flight he booked with her, every 5-star hotel receipt, every step of my retribution. I documented it in an encrypted file I labeled baby names. My notes were meticulous, full of dates and details. I kept the drive hidden inside a hollowed out book on our shelves. 3 months in, my best friend Isabel, a divorce attorney, visited again. She brought a hard drive 3 inches thick. Inside were mirrors of Julian's servers, thanks to a contact inside his company. My travel expenses, my shopping habits, my signature on our prenup, the real one, not the revised version he was drafting. This is enough to get you half, Isabel said. I don't want half. I told her I want to be free of him in 6 months and leave him with nothing. Isabel studied me for a long moment. Then she said, My retainer is waived. We'll file the day after the gala. Why? Because I should have listened to you from the start, a month and a half in. David, Julian's CFO, and an old friend of mine sent me 89 documents, carefully disguised in emails that looked like nursery furniture receipts, boarding passes, credit card statements, wire transfers, everything I needed to prove Julian had funneled $19.7 million from Aura AI over 3 years to fund his lifestyle with Chloe. We still spoke in our own code. David called it balancing the books. I call it building my arsenal. 304 days in. Julian suggested a baby moon. The first time he'd suggested a trip in 3 years. I accepted. I needed to see his face. I needed to know if he sensed the thing. I walked onto the private jet with my stomach in knots. I sat down in the cream leather seat and picked up a glass of sparkling water. Julian walked in, wearing a cashmere sweater and a Patek Philippe. He looked exactly the same, charming, wealthy, invincible. He sat across from me, the polished table between us. Amelia? He said. His voice was warm, attentive, almost doting. How are you feeling? Fine. I've been so worried about you. I know this pregnancy has been tough. I know you're stressed. But once the baby comes, we can move past all this. You can get back to the gallery. We can be a family again. I stared at him. He actually believed I would just forget. He actually thought I'd come back to his side, broken and obedient. Of course, Julian, I said. My voice was smooth, hollow. We'll be a family. He smiled. That same smug smile I'd seen in every photo of him with her. He thought he'd already won. On day 364, I sat at my vanity and pulled the flash drive from the hollowed book. I reviewed it one last time. Every phase committed to memory, every detail, every name, every number. Then I uploaded the files to 3 separate cloud servers, sending the links to Isabel, David, and a reporter at the Wall Street Journal. My sister stood by the door, arms crossed, watching for Julian to come upstairs. The progress bars filled, 3 years of planning, ready to detonate. When the last file finished uploading, I wiped the drive clean and dropped it into my glass of water. Erased but never forgotten. Feeling lighter? Maya asked. Yeah, you won't be needing that anymore. No, I tapped my temple. It's all stored in here now. That evening, I etched the last tally mark into the concrete beside my cot. 1094. I traced my fingers along the deep scratches. Every single day accounted for. The next day was 1095. The next day, I would stop counting. The next day, I would start demolishing. Day 1094, they arrived as a family, united front, one last push to seize what little I had left. I had denied all visits for 3 years. I agreed to this one for a very specific reason. The guard rapped on my cell door at 2 p.m. Sterling. You have company. Maya glanced up from her bed. You certain about this? Yeah. Should I wait up? No, I'll be just fine. I made my way to the visiting area. The pale winter sun was already vanishing through the high barred windows. I took a seat in the booth, lifted the receiver, and waited. They filed in one after another. Liam entered first, dressed in a sleek Silicon Valley suit with a ridiculously expensive watch. Chloe was right behind him, draped in a cashmere shawl and heirloom pearls. My father followed in his country club blazer, his jaw clenched tight. My mother, Eleanor, was last, her eyes already puffy and red. They arranged themselves across the glass from me. Liam took the center seat, flanked by the others like loyal guards. He picked up his phone. Ava, he said, his voice dripping with false warmth. You look wonderful. I remained silent. We've all missed you so much, Chloe chimed in, leaning into the microphone. Her smile was blinding, a well rehearsed performance. It has been far too long. I held her gaze. 3 years prior, she had sworn in court that I was emotionally unstable due to my pregnancy, that I was desperate for money, and that I had embezzled funds to escape my life. Now she was acting as if we were dear sisters. My father cleared his throat loudly. Ava, Sterling Developments is in trouble. Without a firm hand, our investors are getting nervous. The board is discussing a buyout. We have to move decisively. Move how? I asked, my voice flat. Liam leaned in closer to the glass. We need you to sign over your controlling interest to me, just temporarily, just until this is all behind you. Once you're out, once you've had time to get back on your feet, we can renegotiate everything. A bitter laugh almost escaped me. Sign over my company, I echoed. It is for the sake of our legacy, my father insisted. Sterling Designs has been our family's pride for 40 years. Your grandfather founded it. I expanded it. You and Liam were meant to take it to new heights. We cannot let it crumble. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a silk handkerchief. Ava, please think of your grandfather. Think of the name we have built. The name I built, I corrected him softly. Liam's smile became a thin line. We all built it, Ava, as a family. Chloe nodded eagerly. It is time to put this all behind us. Let go of the resentment. Let go of the accusations. Just sign the documents and we can begin to heal. I scanned their faces one by one. My father, who had told the press I was a disgrace. My mother, who had whispered that I had to pay for my mistakes. Liam, my husband, who had orchestrated the entire fraud. Chloe, my friend, who had sold her soul to take my place. They genuinely believed I would just hand them my life's work. The door to the visiting room creaked open. Marcus walked in. He was late, which meant he was perfectly on time. He sat at the far end of the booth, picked up the receiver on his side, and said sorry for the delay. Bay Bridge traffic was a nightmare. Liam shot him a brief, dismissive glance. Marcus, excellent. Perhaps you can make her see reason. Marcus looked directly at me, his expression a perfect mask of neutrality. Ava, I understand your anger, I truly do, but a legacy is about survival. Sometimes, for the good of the enterprise, we have to bury the past to build the future. For everyone who is relying on us. Liam grinned, convinced Marcus was his ally. But I saw the signal, the almost imperceptible flicker in Marcus's eyes, the slight angle of his head, the true message he was sending me. The board is ready. I met his gaze for a fraction of a second before turning back to Liam. No, I said. Liam blinked, confused. What? I'm not signing a single thing. My father's expression hardened. Ava, do not be a fool. If you refuse, the board will vote you out. You will be left with nothing. I already have nothing, I said. You took it all 3 years ago, when you sat back and watched me get sent here for a crime I never committed. My mother began to weep openly. Ava, please don't do this. I spent 1,094 days in this place, I said, my voice steady and cold. 1,094 days planning for this exact moment. 1,094 days reliving what you did to me. And you think I would just give you my company? Liam leaned back, his smug smile completely gone. You have no other option. Oh, I do. Ava, my father's voice was a low growl. You are throwing away everything our family stands for. No, I said. I am taking back everything you stole. I rose to my feet, the phone still clutched in my hand. Consider this our final conversation, I stated. I slammed the receiver down. Liam shot up from his chair, pressing his palm flat against the glass. Ava, wait. I turned my back on him and walked toward the exit. My mother shrieked my name. My father bellowed something I couldn't make out. Liam pounded his fist on the thick partition. I never looked back. I saw Marcus whisper something to him. The sound didn't carry through the glass, but I could read his lips. I tried. He was confirming for my benefit, not Liam's, that the final piece was in place. I returned to my cell. Maya was on her cot, absorbed in a novel. How did it go? She asked without looking up. Perfectly, I replied. She broke into a wide grin. Tomorrow's the day. Yep. You prepared? I gazed at the wall, at the 1,094 marks I had painstakingly carved, at the small empty space where the 1,095th would have been. I have been prepared for a very long time, I said. I didn't get any sleep that night. I lay on my cot, staring at the concrete ceiling, and played out the next day in my mind. Tomorrow the gates of this prison would swing open. Tomorrow I would step into the crisp morning air, a free woman. Tomorrow Liam would discover what 3 years of meticulous planning feels like. Tomorrow all of them would learn that you never ever underestimate a woman with nothing left to lose. The prison gates swung open at 8:47 a.m. on a Wednesday, 8:47 in the morning. The gates opened. I walked through them with a single plastic bag of belongings and 3 years of strategy. A black Tesla was waiting. Marcus Hayes had arrived ahead of schedule. At 8 o'clock that morning, I surveyed my cell one last time. Maya sat on her bed watching me. You all set? She asked. Yeah. You have every step memorized? She pressed. I nodded. Go get them, Ava. Go burn it all down. I gave her a small smile. No thank you was necessary. We both knew actions were all that mattered now. The guard arrived at 8:30. He unlocked my cell and escorted me down the corridor to be processed out. They handed back my effects, a wallet, a smartphone that had been dead for 3 years, and the keys to a condo I no longer possessed. I signed the release documents. I changed out of the drab prison scrubs and into the outfit Marcus had sent, a tailored black coat, dark denim, and leather boots. At 8:45, they walked me to the main gate, and that's when I saw it all. The press. At least 15 reporters, a swarm of cameras and microphones, a complete circus. And my family. My father, Robert, stood front and center in his navy blazer. My mother, Eleanor, stood beside him, clutching a bouquet of white roses. Chloe was there in a ridiculously expensive coat, her hair styled perfectly. And Liam in a charcoal suit, hands casually in his pockets, smiling for the cameras. They had orchestrated this whole thing. A perfect photo opportunity, the loving family welcoming home their prodigal daughter, a story of forgiveness and redemption. I had to stop myself from laughing out loud. Marcus stood off to the side, completely separate from the group. He didn't make a move toward me. That was part of our plan. He just watched, his expression unreadable. The gate clicked open, a barrage of camera flashes blinded me. Eleanor stepped forward, her arms open wide, the roses trembling in her grasp. Darling, she called out, her voice pitched to be caught by every microphone. Welcome home, sweetheart. I walked right past her. I didn't break my stride. I didn't meet her eyes. I certainly didn't take the flowers. I heard them hit the asphalt behind me. Robert reached for my arm. Ava. I walked past him too. Liam's smile began to fade. He moved to intercept me, blocking my way. Ava, he said, we have to talk. I finally looked him in the eyes. For 3 long years, I had rehearsed this very moment. I had imagined 1,000 things I would say, 1,000 things I would do. But in the end, I said nothing at all. I just stared at him. Then I calmly stepped around him and continued walking. The black Tesla glided up to the curb. Marcus got out of the driver's seat and opened the rear door for me. He spoke just loudly enough for the cameras to hear. Your car is ready, Miss Sterling. I slid into the leather seat. The door shut with a solid thud. The chaos, the shouting reporters, my mother calling my name, the endless clicking of cameras, it all vanished. Through the dark tinted window, I watched the scene I had created. The press descended on my family. Eleanor's hand hung uselessly by her side. The white roses scattered and crushed on the ground. Liam just stared at the car's license plate, his jaw tight with fury. Marcus got behind the wheel and pulled smoothly away from the curb. Neither of us spoke for the first 5 minutes. I just watched the world go by. The landscape shifted from barren fields to sprawling suburbs, and finally to the iconic skyline of San Francisco rising against the morning fog. Marcus glanced at me in the rearview mirror. The penthouse is secured. Dr. Cartwright is on standby. Take the scenic route, I said. I want to see my city. Marcus nodded and steered onto the freeway towards downtown. We drove through the heart of the financial district, past gleaming skyscrapers and historic facades, past the buildings that were born from my own mind, the sustainable high-rise on Mission Street, the luxury hotel in Nob Hill. They were all still there, my creations, my legacy. And then we turned onto the Embarcadero and I saw it. The Azure Spire, 1,200 waterfront plaza, 28 stories of glass and steel, shimmering in the pale sun. It was completed. Stop the car, I said. Marcus pulled over to the side of the road. I stepped out onto the pavement and just stared up at the building. Hundreds of investors had been ruined here, my investors, my reputation. Liam had bled them dry. He had used a shadow corporation to funnel the funds away. He had framed me for it all. He had walked away without a scratch. But that was about to change. Today, I murmured, everyone is going to learn the truth. Marcus stood beside me. How much time before Liam finds out the development accounts are frozen? I turned to face him. What time is it now? 9:30. He's being interviewed on market makers at 2 this afternoon. I told Marcus the brokerage will reject his seed trade for the new fund right after he announces it. Marcus raised an eyebrow. You're timing it for the middle of his live segment. No. I smiled. It was the first genuine smile I'd had in 3 years. I timed it so he'd be on national television in front of 300,000 viewers when his head trader tells him his accounts are frozen. Marcus just stared, then let out a low whistle. You're formidable? Good. We got back in the town car. Marcus steered onto the FDR Drive, heading south toward downtown. Phase 1 is a go, I said. Marcus nodded. Dr. Sharma has the forensic accounting complete. I've written the emergency injunctions. The second we're in the hotel suite, we file. How long for the court to process them? 4 hours, maybe 5. The asset freeze will be active by 2 p.m. perfect. We rode in silence for a few blocks. Then Marcus said, Eleanor, are you certain about this? Once we file, there's no turning back. Julian will know. Your families will know. This is going to get messy. I gazed out the window. The East River shimmered in the afternoon sun. The skyline I had helped him conquer stretched out before me. It's already messy, I said. I'm just the one finally sending the bill. The suite was on the 52nd floor of the Mandarin Oriental, a war room with a view of Central Park. Phase 1 had begun. By evening, Julian would lose the one thing he valued more than money, his reputation. I stood in the marble bathroom of the suite for 10 full minutes before I turned on the shower. 3 years. I hadn't felt safe in my own home in 3 years. I'd been living in a gilded cage with a man I despised. Every day a performance. Now I stood in front of a rainfall shower head and heated floors. The water was scalding. The towels were plush. I closed my eyes, letting the steam envelop me. For 30 seconds, I let myself feel everything. The betrayal, the exhaustion, the weight of 1,095 days of lies. Then I stepped out, dried off, and put on the robe. There was work to do. The war room was the suite's living area with a glass table, 3 laptops, and binders of financial documents. Marcus was already typing furiously. A woman I didn't know was by the window holding a tablet. She turned as I entered. She was maybe 58, with penetrating dark eyes and the posture of a drill sergeant. She wore a tailored navy suit and a sharp, knowing look. Eleanor Vance, she said. I'm Dr. Anya Sharma, formerly of the SEC, currently a consultant for people with very rich, very stupid husbands. She offered her hand. Welcome back to the world. Let's burn his to the ground. I shook it. It's a pleasure. Marcus looked up. Eleanor, I've prepared the injunctions, a freeze on all personal and corporate trading accounts tied to Julian Croft, a restraining order against moving any funds offshore. We're ready. Excellent. I took a seat at the table. Let me see the audit. Marcus slid a thick binder across the glass. 89 pages. Trading logs, wire transfer receipts, encrypted messages, Shell Corporation filings, everything Finn had dug up over 3 years. I began to read. About 15 minutes in, I paused. Marcus, this wire transfer to the Azure Holdings Shell Corp, the one for the penthouse. What about it? The official bank record says it was executed on June 10th, but the timestamp on the internal trade log is June 22nd. Marcus frowned. A clerical error? No. I pulled up the corresponding file on my laptop. It's not an error. Someone falsified the trade log. Julian moved the money, then created a fake record after the fact to make it look like a legitimate, earlier investment. Anya leaned over my shoulder. That's wire fraud. That's securities fraud. That's a decade in federal prison. I looked at Marcus. Can you prove it? Possibly, but it requires deep server access. How much time? A week? Maybe longer? We don't have a week. I pulled out my phone and called Finn. He picked up immediately. Eleanor. Finn, I need you to pull the raw server logs from Croft Capital's trading platform, June of 2021. I need the exact creation timestamp for any log entry involving Azure Holdings. What for? Because he faked a federal document and I need irrefutable proof in the next 20 minutes. Finn was silent for a bit. Then he said, Give me 10. At 1:30 p.m., Finn called back. Got it. The log was created on June 23rd, 2 days after you announced your pregnancy. He backdated it to hide the money he was sending to her. I shut my eyes. Send it to Marcus right now. Marcus's laptop chimed. He opened the file, his eyes scanned it, and then he looked up at me stunned. This is it. If we attach this as an exhibit, the judge won't hesitate. Good. I glanced at my watch. What time is Julian's interview? 2:00 p.m. He's announcing his new global macro fund with the anchor from market makers. It's a $500 million launch. I smiled. File the injunctions at 1:45. I want his seed trade to be rejected on live television. Marcus stared at me. Eleanor, that's vicious. I know, I said. He gaslighted me through my entire pregnancy while he was buying a penthouse for his mistress. I want 500,000 investors to watch him get humiliated. Anya laughed. I adore you. Marcus nodded slowly. 1:45 it is. At 1:45 p.m., Marcus electronically filed the three emergency injunctions, freeze all trading accounts under Julian Croft's control, injunction against asset transfers, mandatory forensic audit by a court-appointed receiver. At 1:48 p.m., Anya called Judge Miller. Evelyn, it's Anya Sharma. I'm calling in that favor from the Petrova case. She paused. I need you to sign an emergency asset freeze, right now. Another pause. My thanks. She hung up. He'll sign it within 5 minutes. At 1:50 p.m., the signed court order was transmitted. The prime brokerage received the freeze notification. At 2 p.m., we brought up the market maker's live stream on the 70-inch television in the suite. Julian was on set in a crisp navy suit, looking charming. The famous anchor sat across from him. Behind them, a graphic read, Julian Croft announces Croft Global Macro Fund. Julian leaned into the microphone. We are so excited to launch this new chapter. Together, we are going to redefine risk-adjusted returns. The anchor smiled. To kick things off, you're seeding the fund live on our show. Julian laughed and nodded to his team off camera. He then pulled out his personal black card to pay for a celebratory dinner for the crew. He handed it to a production assistant. The assistant swiped it. Her smile faltered. She swiped it a second time. At 2:03 p.m., she leaned in and whispered something to Julian. His confident smile vanished. He took the card from her. He tried it himself at a nearby terminal. Rejected. He tried it again. Rejected. A third time. Rejected. The crew in the studio began to murmur. The anchor, sensing trouble, tried to pivot. Julian's phone began to vibrate on the table. He snatched it up. His face turned ghost white. On the live broadcast, his lips clearly formed the words, "What the hell?" I closed my laptop. Phase 1 is complete, I said. Marcus let out a long breath. God help us. Anya raised her espresso cup. To payback. That evening, I stood by the window of the suite, looking out over the city. The lights of Manhattan glittered in every direction. The river was a dark ribbon below. Marcus came to stand next to me. What happens now? Phase 2. Tomorrow, David Chen is holding a press conference. He's going to detail how Julian forced him to falsify the quarterly reports. The full forensic audit gets leaked to the press. And phase 3? I smiled. Isabella finds out about Chloe. Marcus's eyebrows shot up. Julian's partner's wife, yes. Finn has the flight manifests, the jewelry receipts, the text messages. Isabella's father is their biggest investor. She's going to implode. And when she does, she's going to hand us the entire firm. You've planned for everything. I had 3 years. Julian's phone rang 47 times before dawn. By 9 a.m., the Wall Street Journal's headline blared, Fraud Allegations Rock Croft Capital. David Chen had waited 3 years to reclaim his integrity. Julian woke up at 6:30 a.m. to 47 missed calls. I knew because Marcus had arranged for a log of his inbound calls the moment the injunction hit. 47 calls. Investors, board members, the bank, his attorney, journalists. Julian sat up in his silk sheets and clicked the first link his assistant texted him. A leaked forensic audit, 112 pages. Expert analysis proving his signature on falsified trade confirmations. E-discovery reports showing he'd embezzled $19.7 million over 3 years. By 7 a.m., Isabella was standing in their bedroom doorway holding her phone. Did you fake the reports? She asked. Julian looked up from his laptop. It's not that simple. Did you fake them? Isabella, just listen to me. Answer the question. He said nothing. She walked away. At 8 a.m., the Wall Street Journal ran the story on its front page, a side by side comparison of the real fund performance and Julian's fraudulent version. A quote from an anonymous quant analyst: the alterations hid massive losses and embezzled funds. This wasn't mismanagement, it was a calculated deception. By 8:30, every financial news network had picked it up. At 9 a.m., David Chen held a press conference. I watched it from the suite. Marcus sat beside me, his own laptop open. Anya stood by the window, arms folded. David stood on the steps of his modest Queen's Row house. He was wearing a simple colored shirt and slacks. His hands were visibly trembling. A swarm of reporters filled his small front yard, cameras whirring. "My name is David Chen," he began, his voice quiet but clear. "I was a junior analyst at Croft Capital. I was there on June 15th, 2021. I know what he did." He took a deep breath, looking down at his prepared notes. "I saw Mr. Julian Croft in his office late that night. He ordered me to create a backdated entry in the trading log. He said it was to cover a simple accounting error. I told him it looked like a fraud. He told me to do my job or find a new one. He said, 'Don't tell Eleanor.'" A reporter yelled a question from the crowd. Leo raised a hand to quiet the room. "I should have spoken up. I should have gone to the authorities, but Mr. Sterling threatened my seat on the board. He made it clear that if I made waves, my career in venture capital would be over." Leo's voice trembled with emotion. "But our investors lost everything. Mark Chen, Sarah Jenkins, the entire Rodriguez family fund. They were good people, and Damien Vance went to jail for a crime he didn't commit. I refuse to be a party to this lie any longer." He took a step back from the podium. A flurry of reporters rushed him, their questions a chaotic roar. Leo ignored them, disappearing into the building and letting the heavy oak doors close behind him. Marcus glanced at me. He was perfect. I nodded. "You all right?" "I am now. Decent people can't swallow a lie that big forever." My phone buzzed. It was a text from inside the building. "The board is calling an emergency meeting in 1 hour. They are going to push for Julian's temporary removal. Let them try," I replied. By 10 a.m., the Sterling and Vance Capitol building was a fortress besieged by news vans. Reporters crowded the marble steps. Private security formed a wall at the entrance. Upstairs, on the 42nd floor, the board was in session. I wasn't invited, but I had an inside source who texted me minute by minute plays. 10:15 a.m. They're voting on the emergency CEO suspension. 10:30 a.m. Julian is losing it, calling Leo a senile traitor. 10:45 a.m. The vote is split. They want a full forensic audit before making a move. Julian's lawyers are filibustering. At 11 a.m., a journalist ambushed Julian in the building's grand lobby. The clip was all over the internet in seconds. "Mr. Sterling, did you frame your partner?" Julian's face was ashen, his jaw clenched. No comment. "Did you falsify SEC filings?" No comment. "Did you embezzle funds from the Phoenix Project?" Julian shoved the microphone away and stormed out to his waiting car. By lunchtime, their flagship tech fund had plummeted 18%. Omnicorp released a public statement. "We are formally withdrawing our Series B funding offer pending the results of this investigation." 3 of their biggest portfolio companies triggered their key person clauses. 2 more demanded an immediate call. At 1 p.m., my own lawyer Marcus held a press conference. He stood on the courthouse steps in a perfectly tailored suit, his expression grave. "Effective immediately, I am filing a motion to appeal on behalf of my client, Damien Vance," he announced. "We have new evidence that suggests my client was the victim of a malicious and calculated frame-up. I have full confidence that Mr. Vance will be exonerated. It was pure theater. We'd rehearsed it for a week." Marcus was putting public pressure on the district attorney's office, making it a political liability for them not to reopen the case. To the world, it looked like the first crack in Julian's carefully constructed empire. It was flawless. At 2 p.m., the SEC released their own statement. The U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission has launched a formal inquiry into allegations of wire fraud, securities fraud, and insider trading connected to Sterling and Vance Capital and the 2022 Phoenix Project collapse. We are cooperating fully with the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Northern District of California. No charges have been filed at this time. Not even an hour later, a federal magistrate signed an order to place a temporary freeze on all of Julian's personal and corporate holdings. By 3 p.m., Julian Sterling was cut off. His corporate accounts were locked. His personal credit cards were declined. He couldn't liquidate his stocks or touch his real estate. He was a billionaire trapped in a gilded cage. I stood at the floor to ceiling window of my apartment, watching the fog roll in over the Golden Gate Bridge. Marcus came and stood next to me. The pieces are moving. Yeah. What is the endgame, Damien? I asked. Do you think she's going to turn on him? I'm counting on it. My sister Ava walked in, holding a glass of champagne. What gives you that much faith? I gave a thin smile, because this evening she gets to find out her husband is a cheat. At 8 p.m., a single email with no subject line arrived in Claire Sterling's inbox. The email contained only one thing, a link to a private image gallery. Claire opened it. Inside were dozens of photos. Julian with Chloe Ramsey, the 24-year-old analyst who worked on the Phoenix Project, kissing outside a bar in Napa Valley, holding hands at a gallery opening, entering a suite at the Fairmont. There were 12 sets of photos, all time-stamped over the last 9 months. At the very bottom of the gallery was a simple line of text. He betrayed you too. Let's get coffee. DV. Claire called at 11:23 p.m. Her voice was hollow. The whole city now knows the truth. But before I tell you who hammered the final nail in the coffin, the one person Julian thought he owned completely, drop a comment. Who do you think was the final betrayer? I want to see what you think. A quick heads up. This story is a dramatized retelling designed to explore complex themes. If stories about intense betrayal are not for you, this is a good place to press pause. Still here? Let's dive into the twist. Where are we meeting? Claire's voice was tight with controlled fury. An old saying comes to mind. Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. Julian was about to get a master class. I told her to meet at the quiet lounge in Nob Hill, the kind of place with dark corners and bartenders who minded their own business. Marcus was already waiting in a booth, a leather briefcase on the seat beside him. I got there at 11:30. A cold mist was falling outside, painting streaks on the tall windows. The lounge was quiet, just a pianist playing softly in the corner. A few tourists were scattered around the bar. I slid into the booth and ordered 2 espressos. Claire arrived at 11:45. She looked like she'd been crying for hours. Her eyes were swollen and her makeup was a mess. She wore a chic trench coat over what looked like silk pajamas. Her hair, usually perfect, was hastily tied up. She was a ghost of the immaculate socialite who had testified against me 2 years ago. She sat opposite me, clutching her purse. You sent that link, she stated. I did. How long have you known about them? 3 weeks. I hired a PI. He tailed Julian. Every picture was taken in a public space. Totally admissible. Her knuckles were white. Why show me? I leaned in, my voice low. Because you helped him ruin my life. And now he's doing the exact same thing to you. We can be useful to each other. I would never trust you. You don't have to trust me, Claire. You just have to despise him more than you resent me. She just stared, her gaze flicking between me and Marcus. She didn't touch her espresso. I was in love with him, she whispered. When he came to me with all that evidence against you, I bought every word of it. He had doctored emails, fabricated wire transfers. He said you were bleeding the company dry. He said you were trying to push him out, and you took his word for it. He was my husband. Her voice was sharp. I was pregnant. I was supposed to trust him. I stayed silent. Claire dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. He asked for my help. He said he needed to build a timeline of your supposed negligence. He asked me to backdate a few memos. Just tiny little things, meeting dates, approval signatures. He said it was just to create a paper trail to prove you were lying to investors. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. So you forged company records. Yes. She met my eyes, tears openly rolling down her cheeks now. I helped put you away. And he was with that girl the entire time. Her voice shattered on the final word. I leaned back. I had anticipated rage. I had prepared for denial. I had not prepared for this raw, broken confession. How long has it been going on? I asked gently. 9 months, maybe more. Who knows? She pulled a compact from her purse, trying uselessly to fix her ruined mascara. He told me they were late night strategy sessions. He said they were investor dinners, and I smiled and believed him. Because I'm a fool. You're not a fool, Claire. You're a wife who was manipulated by her husband. She let out a humorless laugh. And look how well that turned out for me. Marcus slid a document across the polished table. This is a proffer agreement from the U.S. Attorney's Office. If you agree to cooperate, testify truthfully, and provide any and all evidence you have, the DA will recommend probation instead of the 10 years you're facing. Claire's head snapped up. 10 years? You have a son, right? 4 years old? She stared at him, her breath catching. How do you know about Leo? I know everything, Claire. With probation, you can be home to tuck him in every night, and you can have a future. If I don't sign, then you become a co conspirator. 10 years minimum. Conspiracy to commit fraud. Obstruction of justice. Your son will be in high school by the time you see the outside of a prison. She picked up the document. Her hands were visibly trembling. How can I be sure you'll honor this? I locked my eyes on hers. Because unlike your husband, I keep my promises. The air between us was thick with tension. What do you want from me? She finally asked. Everything, the real emails, the actual financial records, the offshore transfers, every forged document, the complete timeline. I need irrefutable proof that Julian planned this whole thing. I need proof he used you to do it. Claire reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a small encrypted hard drive. She placed it on the table between us. I started backing up his server 3 months ago, she said quietly. I didn't know what I was looking for. I felt something was wrong. I suspected he was hiding assets from me. I never imagined it was because of her. I picked up the drive. What exactly is on this? 156 undeleted emails between Julian and me, where he details the entire plan to frame you, where he coaches me on my testimony. What else? Statements from 3 offshore accounts, $19.7 million. He's been scheming from the firm for the last 3 years. The transfer receipts, the paperwork for the shell corporations in the Bahamas. My heart started to beat faster. This was the mother lode. And there's more, Claire added. I have the original memos, the ones I altered. They're in my handwriting. I made copies because I was terrified he would turn on me if it all went bad. She gave another bitter laugh. Turns out my instincts were spot on. Marcus opened his briefcase, retrieved a folder, and opened it on the table. Inside was the formal immunity agreement, 3 pages of dense legal text with signature lines at the end. Read it very carefully, Marcus advised. This is a one-time offer. Claire read through it, her lips moving silently. It took her almost 5 minutes. When she finished, she looked directly at me. I have one condition, and that is, I want your promise that my testimony about his affair will be admissible. I want to talk about Chloe, the gifts, the trips, all of it. I want the jury to know what kind of man he really is. He deserves to lose more than just his freedom. I glanced at Marcus. He gave a slight nod. We can arrange that. Marcus took out a pen and added a new clause to the bottom of the document. Claire read it, nodded once, and signed her name. She pushed the paper back to us. It's done. I clutched the solid-state drive in my palm. It was feather-light, barely there. It felt like nothing, but it held the key to everything. Marcus slid the signed partnership agreement into his briefcase. This was going to ruin him. I looked at Marcus. Do you have any second thoughts? He was silent for a long bit. Then he said, Yes, but my desire for justice is stronger. For now, that's enough. I nodded. For now, that was everything. 3 days later, federal agents showed up with a warrant. Marcus's deposition was 47 pages long. Every single word was the gospel truth. The agents didn't bother with a polite knock. At 6 a.m. on Thursday, 16 agents moved in. 6 a.m. Thursday, 16 agents served the search warrant on Aura Innovations. By midday, 2,847 files had been confiscated. By sunset, Julian was in federal custody. The SEC arrived in 6 black Suburbans. They didn't knock. They used a tactical ram on the plate glass doors of the Aura Innovations headquarters and swarmed the atrium. I wasn't there, of course, but Marcus called me at 6:15 a.m. and gave me a play-by-play. Agent Riley, the lead on the case, went directly to Julian's penthouse office on the 34th floor. Julian was already at his desk, staring intently at his monitor. He had been there all night. As the agents entered, Julian tried to initiate a remote wipe of the servers. He clicked the mouse furiously, his hand trembling. Agent Riley grabbed his wrist. Step away from the computer. This is my private office. Not today, it isn't. Step back. They confiscated his laptop. They took his personal phone. They pried open his file drawers and began pulling out documents, investment contracts, source code manifests, and financial statements, absolutely everything. By 7:30, they had already filled 23 evidence boxes. At 7:45 a.m., Agent Riley informed Julian of his rights. Julian Beaumont, you are being placed under arrest for securities fraud, embezzlement, wire fraud, and obstruction of justice. They put him in handcuffs. They paraded him through the main office, past his employees who gawked in stunned silence, and took the elevator down to the lobby where the news crews were already gathered. The classic perp walk. Julian's face was ashen, his eyes darting around wildly. As they guided him outside, he twisted toward the cameras and shouted, "My wife is having a breakdown. She's a liar. This is a complete fabrication." The video was all over the internet in less than an hour. At 9 a.m., my in laws were sitting in the living room of their Lake Washington estate watching the broadcast. Marcus had a contact inside their staff, a housekeeper who was giving me updates. She sent me a text at 9:15. Eleanor is weeping. Richard has been silent. At 9:30, another message came through. Eleanor just whispered, "How could this happen?" Richard responded, "My God, what if she was telling the truth all along?" "Eleanor, what have we done?" I looked at the text message for a very long time. Then I set my phone aside. At 11 a.m., I walked into my lawyer's office for the first time in what felt like 3 years. The conference room was quiet. My legal team was moving in and out with binders and files. My lead counsel, a small group of them, were whispering in a corner. When I entered, the room fell completely silent. They just looked. Some appeared sympathetic, some looked triumphant. A few offered a quiet round of applause. I paid them no mind. I walked to the head of the conference table and sat down. Julian's office was now a crime scene, swarming with federal agents. Agent Riley met me in the conference room. "Miss Dubois," she said, "we need you to authenticate which recordings document the conspiracy and which are unrelated." I glanced around the table. Hard drives and transcripts were laid out everywhere. My life. 3 years of my marriage. All of them. I said, every conversation about Aura's finances is relevant. Anything that discusses offshore accounts or investor deception, that's all Julian. Riley nodded. "Understood. We will need a signed statement for each piece of evidence." "I'll sign them all." I spent the following 2 hours listening to recordings, confirming dates, and signing my name over and over. When I was finished, my hand was cramping. At 2 p.m., the board called for an emergency session. 12 members were present, 7 in the room, 5 on a video call. Marcus and I sat at the far end of the table. My lawyer sat next to me. Marcus got up and gave a summary of the evidence. The falsified investor reports, the embezzled capital, the shell corporations, my testimony, his own statement, and the forensic accountant's findings. After he concluded, the room was deathly quiet. Then Marcus stood again. He brought up a slide on the main screen. It was a wire transfer confirmation. My husband's original pitch deck specified all seed funding would go to research and development, Marcus said. His voice was calm and controlled. Julian redirected it to a personal account in the Caymans. That's a 100% violation of his fiduciary duty. One of the board members sat forward. "How can you be sure Julian authorized that transfer?" Marcus took out his phone and played a video on the screen. It was a recording from the smart home system. Julian, clear as day on the phone. Julian's voice: "Transfer the full 4.7 million. Yes to the W12 account. Consider it a founder's bonus. I recorded this 3 years ago, Marcus said. The day after he forced me out, I knew he'd done something illegal. I just couldn't prove it yet. The boardroom descended into chaos. Members began shouting over one another. Someone demanded to know if Marcus had more recordings. Another asked why he didn't bring this to them sooner. Marcus let the noise die down. Then he said, "My initial algorithm was sound. Julian's greed put this entire company at risk." And then he tried to blame the market for his failures. The decision was instantaneous. A motion to oust Julian Beaumont as CDO passed unanimously. A motion to reinstate Marcus Thorne's shares and grant him the position of interim CEO passed 11 to 1. A motion to cooperate fully with federal investigators passed unanimously. At 4 p.m., I was standing in my temporary apartment, not his office, looking out at the city skyline. Marcus came to stand next to me. "You did it." "Not for long," I replied. "What do you mean?" "This company is toxic. Julian poisoned its culture. I have no intention of spending my life trying to fix something that is fundamentally broken." "So what's your plan?" "To start fresh. I'm handing full control to Marcus. He earned it. He's the one who fought back. He's the one who collected the proof. Let him have it." Marcus looked at me intently. "And what about you?" "I'll open a new restaurant, somewhere far away, somewhere peaceful." By 6 p.m., the story was a media firestorm. Every news channel in the nation was leading with it. Isabelle Dubois vindicated. Tech CEO husband arrested. My phone buzzed 127 times. I powered it down. I sat in my apartment and watched the day end. The city lights began to twinkle below. It appeared just as it had 3 years ago. But I was no longer the same person. Marcus poured 2 glasses of sparkling cider and gave one to me. "What is the next step?" I gave a small smile. "Tomorrow we reclaim the penthouse." He arched an eyebrow. "The Belltown penthouse. It's legally mine, a premarital asset. I bought it 10 years ago with cash before I had ever even heard of Julian Beaumont. His parents moved in to help me during my pregnancy. They seemed to have forgotten who it belonged to. I took a drink of the cider. I hadn't. 2 professional moving vans and a sheriff's cruiser rolled up at 2 p.m. on Tuesday. I emerged from a car wearing a black Chanel suit, my lawyer beside me, a freshly issued eviction notice in my hand. I had replayed this scene in my mind every single night for the past year. The waterfront penthouse was at the end of a private secured elevator, 8,500 square feet of chrome and glass, with a view of the Sound, a private terrace, the kind of home that screamed new money even when it tried not to. The 2 moving trucks were waiting by the service entrance. Deputy Miller was standing by the front door, holding a clipboard. A few residents from other floors were peering out of their doors, phones up and recording. My in-laws had not packed, not a single box. A few designer suitcases sat near the door. Eleanor stood next to them, her hands clasped tightly. Richard stood just behind her, his face a mask of rage, his jaw clenched. Chloe was nowhere to be seen. She had been arrested as a co-conspirator. No one had reached out to Julian's sister, Lydia, yet. Or perhaps they had, and she had chosen not to come. I stepped out of the elevator. My lawyer followed. We walked across the marble foyer. Deputy Miller gave me a nod. "Miss Dubois." "Deputy." He read the eviction notice in a clear voice. "By order of the King County Court, Richard and Eleanor Beaumont are to vacate this residence effective immediately. Personal effects only. All property, art, and furnishings purchased with funds from Aura Innovations or currently under investigation for asset forfeiture are to remain." Eleanor was the first to crumble. She let go of the expensive handbag she was clutching. It fell to the polished floor with a soft thud. She rushed towards me, her hands reaching out. "Isabel, please. This is our son's home. Consider the baby. Consider the..." I walked right by her. I didn't hesitate. I didn't break my stride. I did not even glance in her direction. Eleanor sagged against the wall, her composure gone. Richard attempted to maintain his dignity. He squared his shoulders and spoke in a low voice. "Consider the consequences of your actions. The press, the company stock, the family name." I faced him. My voice was frigid. The press is already having a field day. I have no interest in the stock. And as for the family name, I smiled. You let your son destroy that all by himself. Richard's face fell. Lydia's town car arrived 10 minutes later. She got out with a calm, measured grace, her expression unreadable. She walked to the doorway and placed a hand on Eleanor's arm. Mother, she said softly, she's hurt. We need to let her be. Eleanor looked up at her, her face a mess of tear streaked makeup. Lydia, reasoned with her, make her stop this. Lydia's gaze shifted to me. Our eyes locked. There was no pity in her look, but there was something else, a quiet strength. She looked back at Eleanor. I can certainly try. She approached me. She pitched her voice so her parents could hear. Isabel, this is a bit extreme. They are still your family, after all. But her eyes told a completely different story. You are doing the right thing. Richard grabbed Lydia's elbow. Tell her, Lydia. Tell her this is irrational. Lydia looked at him, then she surveyed the penthouse, filled with art, bought with stolen money. Then she looked back at her father. You made your bed, Dad. She said it without malice. You testified for him in the arbitration. You let Julian lie about everything. You picked his side. She gently removed her arm from his grasp and walked away. Eleanor stood up. She retrieved her handbag, just one small black purse, and headed for the elevator. She took out her phone and requested a town car. Richard called to her. Eleanor, where do you think you're going? Eleanor did not look back. Somewhere honest. The elevator arrived 3 minutes later. Eleanor stepped inside and was gone without a backward glance. The setup was supposed to be finished by 5. Eleanor knelt on the plush rug of the nursery, linking the new smart crib system to their home network. As she navigated the cloud settings on her tablet, a sync error connected her to Julian's private drive instead of the family account. A folder labeled Tokyo Project appeared. Curious, she tapped it open. It wasn't blueprints or contracts. It was filled with photos of a woman. Chloe, from his software division, lounging in a hotel room, wearing the diamond necklace Julian had claimed to have custom made for their anniversary. A sharp, painful kick from inside her womb jolted her back to reality. He arrived home an hour later, his face glowing with success. He leaned down to kiss her, but she flinched away. He frowned, his eyes clouding with confusion. What is it, Elle? Is it the baby? She held up the tablet, the image of Chloe displayed brightly. He paled instantly, staggering back as if struck. It's not what it looks like. It's a work thing. His eyes, usually so confident, darted around the room. He sputtered denials, claiming it was a doctored photo, a misunderstanding. He accused her of violating his privacy, his voice turning sharp. It's just what it feels like to be spied on by your own wife. Her calm shattered. You chose this, I whispered, my voice trembling with rage. I turned and walked toward our bedroom to pack a bag. Behind me, I heard him pleading. I heard him say the stress was bad for the baby. I heard him insist he loved me, that she meant nothing. He was just trying to manage his company, to keep his best coder happy. He didn't want to lose her to a competitor. I didn't look back. By 6:30, I had a suitcase ready. He stood in the doorway blocking my path. He begged me not to leave. Not like this. He just needed his wife to stop destroying their future over a meaningless fling. The nursery became my sanctuary. The door was locked. The air still smelled faintly of fresh paint and new beginnings. Julian was on the other side, his tone shifting from remorseful whispers to frustrated demands. Maya called to check in. You okay? I shook my head, though she couldn't see me. She squeezed my hand through the phone. You did the right thing. I didn't answer. Maya, my oldest friend and a ruthless divorce attorney, gave me strict instructions. Do not leave the penthouse. He had to be the one to go. She was running the legal strategy now. The board had made their move. I stood alone in the baby's room. I walked to the wall where our wedding photos used to hang. Pictures from Tuscany, smiling on a yacht. The two of us pretending we were indestructible. I took down the last one from our first anniversary and turned it face down on the changing table. Through the window, I watched the morning fog roll over the Golden Gate Bridge. I watched my husband sleep on the sofa. I watched him wake up and start the espresso machine. One tear slipped down my cheek. I wiped it away immediately. This is what a reckoning looks like, I said quietly. It doesn't feel like I thought it would. The text from Maya the next morning read, "His lawyer just accepted service." 6 months ago, that would have felt like a victory. Now it just felt like the first move in a war. The initial meeting was in 2 weeks. That's when it would truly begin. Croft versus Croft, Superior Court. 6 weeks to rewrite 3 years of a picture perfect lie. I sat at the polished mahogany table every day. I wanted him to see my face. The affair took my marriage. This battle would take his fortune. The law offices of Sterling and Kane, 35th floor, floor to ceiling windows overlooking the bay, gold leaf trim, the kind of conference room where dynasties were dismantled. The room was tense, lawyers and paralegals on both sides, public relations reps standing along the walls. Maya sat beside me, a tablet on her lap. Julian's lawyer, Arthur Vance, presided. 61 years old, silver hair, a reputation for shredding spouses. He drafted our ironclad prenup. Now he was overseeing the negotiation that would determine whether Julian Croft walked away with his 9-figure net worth intact. My lawyer Maya stood at the head of the table, the same woman who'd been my maid of honor 3 years ago, the same woman who'd convinced me the prenup was fair. Now she was on my side. The irony wasn't lost on me. Julian sat at the other end in a gray suit, his face a mask of indignation. His lawyer, Arthur Vance, was 52, expensive and experienced, but he had a losing hand, and he knew it. The first week was discovery. It took 3 days to get the preliminary financials. I took notes on each transaction: a tech startup, a real estate holding, a private equity fund, an art collection, a charitable foundation. The defense tried to argue every asset was protected by the prenup. The judge didn't allow it. On day 4, Maya made her opening statement. "This is a case about fraud disguised as a marital partnership," she said. Her voice was calm, measured. Julian Croft didn't just have an affair. He systematically diverted marital assets, he committed wire fraud to hide his expenditures, and he let his pregnant wife believe they were building a future. Then he tried to use a fraudulent document to protect it all. She pulled up side-by-side bank statements on the screen behind her, our joint account and Chloe's private account showing identical transfers. 3 people are in this marriage. This wasn't a mistake. This was calculated theft, and the defendant knew exactly what he was doing. Arthur Vance stood for the defense. "This is a case about a scorned wife weaponizing her pregnancy." He said, "Romantic indiscretions are not criminal acts. Eleanor Croft was a willing participant in this marriage for 3 years. She's emotional. She wants retribution, and she's using the full weight of her considerable family influence to get it." The lawyers looked at me. I kept my face neutral. Julian's former executive assistant gave a deposition on Monday morning of the second week. Maya asked her to describe August 15th, 2025. The assistant spoke quietly, her hands folded in her lap. "Mr. Croft arrived at the office early, 6:30 a.m. He told me to book a trip to Tokyo. He said Miss Vance had to be on the same flight. I asked for the project code for billing. He said, 'Don't question me, I'm a Croft.' What did you do?" "I booked the tickets." She arrived at his hotel at 7:15. She didn't know I had also booked his wife a surprise ticket for the same weekend, which he had me cancel. He ordered me to lie, but it was too late. The cross-examination was brutal. Arthur Vance accused the assistant of being a disgruntled employee. She didn't flinch. "I should have spoken up 3 years ago," she said, "but Mr. Croft threatened my career. I have 2 kids. I was scared. That doesn't make me a liar. It makes me human." I caught her eye as she left the room. I nodded. She nodded back. A forensic accountant testified on Tuesday. He admitted everything: the $85,000 necklace, the 3 wire transfers, the falsified expense reports. Maya displayed the bank records on the screen. Three deposits: March 12th, April 8th, May 20th. Mr. Croft told me it was a retainer for a ghost corporation, the accountant said. He told me Mrs. Croft knew about the shell company. I believed him. Arthur Vance pounced. You're testifying to get immunity from prosecution, aren't you? Yes. So why should the court believe you? The accountant looked at the mediator. Because it's still the truth. By the end of the second week, the prosecution called Dr. Avery Dane, a financial analyst from Stanford, 63 years old, wire rimmed glasses, 30 years of experience. He was the best expert witness money could buy, and Maya had hired him. Dr. Dane walked the mediator through my original marital assets. Mrs. Croft's contributions accounted for a W14 by 90 initial investment. This portfolio meets all fiduciary standards. It's excellent work. He pulled up Julian's modified portfolio. Mr. Croft diverted it to a W12 by 65 shadow fund. That's a 32% reduction in community property. A first year business student would know that's illegal. He played a 3D animation of the money trail. The lawyers leaned forward, riveted. The primary account was depleted. The offshore account grew. The trust fund was violated. $3 million disappeared because Mr. Croft chose his affair over his family. Dr. Dane said the defense brought in their own expert. He was weaker, unconvincing. The mediator didn't buy it. On Friday afternoon of the third week, my parents testified. My mother took the stand first. She was 68 years old. She wore a black dress. Her hand shook as she gripped the table's edge. My daughter, Eleanor, was betrayed by greed, she said. Her voice broke. Our grandchild is due in 3 weeks. She doesn't know what her father's true face looks like. She asks me sometimes. I show her pictures, but it's not the same. She looked at Julian. You took her trust from us for lust. My father testified next. My daughter is 33. He said she was about to start a family. His mistress still has the jewelry. She keeps it in a box. She can't bring herself to part with it. My best friend, Maya, testified last. My client was a partner, she said. She died a little trying to save this marriage. She wasn't even supposed to know about any of this. She came to it by accident because she cared. The conference room was silent. Julian stared at the table. He didn't look up. He didn't meet their eyes. I cried quietly. It was the first time anyone had seen me cry since the deposition began. My father handed me a tissue. I wiped my eyes and kept watching. Week 4 was Chloe. Week 5, Maya would present the technical evidence of wire fraud. But week 4 was what I was waiting for. Week 4, Chloe Vance would take the stand. Finally, I'd get to hear her explain how she justified destroying a family. Week 4, Chloe Vance took the stand. Julian's face went white. Chloe wasn't just going to testify about the affair, she was about to reveal the conspiracy to hide marital assets. Every word she spoke buried him deeper. Chloe took the stage on Monday evening, the fourth week of the product launch tour. She wore a severe black dress, her makeup perfect, her blonde hair sleek. She didn't look at Julian in the front row. She looked at the investors. The journalist, Sarah Jenkins, stood. Miss Dubois, what was your role in Aura AI's marketing success? Chloe's voice was confident. I helped my CEO build a $19.7 million brand. I secured key partnerships. I crafted our public image and I helped him hide a long-term affair. Jenkins displayed the travel itineraries on the screen behind them, 156 of them. Chloe walked the audience through each trip, the offshore accounts used for billing, the shell companies in the Cayman Islands that paid for private jets. Then Jenkins pulled up a text message dated 2 months before my due date, from Chloe Dubois to Julian Vance. Subject, problem. We need a plan for Amelia. She'll never give up that easily. She's too smart. We need a better option. Julian's reply, handling it. Trust me. The auditorium went silent. Julian's lawyer stood for a rebuttal. You're testifying to get a better severance package, aren't you? Yes. You discovered he was seeing other women. This is revenge, isn't it? Chloe looked at him. Both. But it doesn't make the facts any less factual. The investors believed her. David testified on Tuesday of week 5. He wore a dark suit. His hands were steady as he took the mic, but I could see the muscle twitching in his jaw. Sarah Jenkins asked him to walk through the financial evidence, the fraudulent expense reports, the doctored invoices. David explained it all clearly, methodically, and then Jenkins asked, "When did you first suspect your CEO of planning to defraud his wife?" David paused. 3 weeks before the launch. Why? David held up a document. I found Julian's notes with his legal team. He'd scheduled a meeting for 7:30 a.m. on October 15th, 2025. Jenkins leaned forward. What's significant about that? Julian had told his wife at 6:47 a.m. that morning that he wanted to finalize the nursery designs with their decorator. She arrived at the architect's office at 7:15. The meeting with his lawyers was at 7:43. The room was dead silent. "Mr. Cho," Jenkins said slowly, "are you saying Julian Vance expected his wife to be happily planning their child's future while he was actively planning to leave her with nothing?" David's voice cracked. He was going to serve her with a fraudulent postnup. When that failed, Plan B was to ruin her. The auditorium erupted. Jenkins held up her hand for silence. Jenkins displayed another document, handwritten notes in Julian's handwriting. "Call A to meeting early, make sure she's occupied. If paper signed, problem solved." Julian's lawyer shot to his feet. "Objection, this is a character assassination, this is overruled," the event host said. "The speaker may continue. I sat frozen in the front row. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. My husband had tried to erase me. Isabel put her hand on my shoulder. I was trembling. Julian took the stage on Thursday. It was a desperate move. His PR team had advised against it, but Julian insisted. His lawyer asked the scripted questions. Did you mismanage funds? I optimized them. I'm a licensed venture capitalist. Did you intend to harm your wife? Absolutely not. David is lying. He's always been bitter. Sarah Jenkins stood for cross-examination. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "Mr. Vance, explain this note. Call to meeting early." Julian hesitated. Could be anyone. Alex, the assistant, for example, at 6:47 a.m. before work hours. I don't recall. You don't recall planning to defraud the mother of your unborn child? I didn't defraud anyone, but you did try to coerce her. Julian's face went red. She was taking everything. The company should have been all mine. My vision built it. I deserved it all. The auditorium went silent. Julian's lawyer dropped his head into his hands. Julian realized what he'd said. He tried to backtrack. I didn't mean, but it was too late. Closing arguments came on Friday of week 6. Sarah Jenkins stood. Julian Vance didn't just bend the rules, he broke lives. 3 years of lies. And he intended to make his wife the first casualty. She pointed at Julian. Greed, envy, attempted fraud, all proven beyond a reasonable doubt. The lawyer's closing was weak. He talked about ambition, about misunderstandings, about reasonable doubt. The board didn't buy it. The board of directors deliberated for 8 hours over 2 days. I waited in a hotel suite. Isabel sat beside me. No matter what happens, the world knows the truth. I need him gone, I said. He has to lose everything. Isabel nodded. He will. On Wednesday afternoon, the call came. The room was packed, investors in the front rows, media in the back. Julian sat at the head of the table, his face ashen. The chairman entered. We stood. Has the board reached a decision? The chairman asked. A board member stood. We have, sir. The corporate counsel handed the resolution to the chairman. He read it silently. His face didn't change. Mr. Vance will stand. Julian stood. His hands were shaking. Count 1, gross misconduct in his relationship with a subordinate. How do you find? Terminated. Count 2, misuse of corporate funds. How do you find? Terminated. Count 3, breach of fiduciary duty. How do you find? Terminated. Count 4, conspiracy to commit fraud. How do you find? Terminated. The room exploded. Investors cheered and clapped each other on the back. Reporters rushed for the doors. Julian collapsed into his chair, his head in his hands. I closed my eyes. Tears streamed down my face. Isabel squeezed my hand. It's over. The chairman banged his pen on the table. Order. The transition will take place over 3 weeks, concluding December 18th. The defendant is to be escorted from the premises. Two security guards cuffed Julian's briefcase and led him out of the boardroom. He didn't look at me. I walked out of the building into the cold December air. Isabel walked beside me. Media swarmed us, shouting questions. Isabel waved them off, and then I saw them. My parents standing beside a town car at the curb waiting. My mother took one step forward. For the first time in 3 years, I kept walking. The final hearing was December 18th. The judge didn't waste words. Mr. Vance, you have betrayed every trust placed in you. This was the last time I'd see Julian as anything but a failure. The next time would be across a deposition table. The courtroom was packed one final time, December 18th. It was cold outside, the kind of San Francisco chill that seeped into your bones. The holidays were coming. Christmas lights were strung up on Union Square, shoppers crowding the sidewalks, but there was no festive feeling in this room. I arrived with Isabel and David. We sat in the front row. My parents stood in the back, separated from us by rows of wooden benches and 3 years of avarice. They were facing their own lawsuits for complicity. Julian was led in by his lone remaining lawyer. He wore a rumpled suit. His hands were stuffed in his pockets. His face was pale, his eyes hollow, his shoulders slumped. He looked smaller than I remembered, broken. He didn't look at me. The judge entered. We stood. Please eat something. The silence in our San Francisco penthouse was deafening, broken only by the hum of the city 30 floors below. Julian looked at me, his eyes pleading. The court of our marriage was now in session. I went first. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, my hand resting on my 7-month baby bump. I wore a simple white dress. The life we had built, a glittering lie, was now on full display. 2 years of marriage meant nothing to you, I said. My voice was eerily calm. I'd replayed this scene in my mind for 3 days straight. But our son will know that truth matters, that men who trade vows for thrills will face the consequences. I was a good wife. I deserved better. Our child deserved better. I felt the last bit of warmth in my chest turn to ice. Just last week, I'd sat on our plush sofa, believing I was the happiest woman alive, responsible for this perfect life. Now I was a prosecutor presenting the truth. Julian's defense came next. He was 72 inches of pure charm, his hair perfectly styled, his hands spread in a gesture of surrender. Clara, it was a mistake, he said, his voice a low tremor. It meant nothing. She was just a distraction. A distraction. The word hung in the air, vile and cheap. She has a name, Julian. I looked at him, my stare unwavering. You took our future, our trust, for a distraction. I hope losing it all teaches you the value of what you destroyed. She was in her late 20s, an ambitious architect in a Navy power suit, her jaw always set with determination. Simone Dubois. I saw her picture in a magazine profile. My husband didn't just sleep with another woman that day. He chose her over us. He chose his ego over our family. He died a little to me in that moment. But you, I pointed a trembling finger at Julian. You didn't just break a promise. You shattered the foundation of our entire life, the family we were about to have, the future I saw so clearly. That's what I can never forgive. I sat down. The penthouse was silent except for the sound of my own ragged breath. Julian looked at me. Clara, you have the right to be angry. I stood up. My legs were shaking. I walked towards the bedroom door. I didn't need notes. I'd spent 72 hours thinking about nothing else. A year of planning our future together. A year of meetings with designers for the nursery. A year of learning to separate my identity from his. Julian stole my peace, I said. But it was so much more. He stole my naivete, my faith, my sense of security in my own home. He tried to gaslight me, and when that failed, he tried to blame my pregnancy for my paranoia. I looked at Julian. He was staring at the marble floor. His perfectly tailored suit suddenly looked like a costume. For 3 days, I wanted to scream. I wanted him to hurt the way I was hurting. But I don't want that anymore. I want clarity. I want this charade to be over. I want you to spend every single day knowing that you did this to yourself. That every decision he made, every secret, every betrayal, every ounce of his greed led him to this moment. I took a breath, wanting him to understand that I had endured, that I had pieced my life back together, that he had failed to shatter me. I took my seat. Liam still wouldn't meet my gaze, but I noticed his hands. They were trembling. The master of ceremonies opened the final envelope. He cleared his throat and looked directly at Liam. Mr. Liam Ashford, he began, you are a celebrated chef. You built an empire on the promise of integrity and quality. You betrayed that promise in the most personal way conceivable. 3 careers were ruined because you chose your ego over your team. Your wife almost lost her life because of your deception. You tried to ruin her reputation. You funneled nearly $2 million into a secret life. You lied to your partners. You have shown no remorse. He paused. The entire ballroom was silent. This industry sentences you to obscurity. You are no longer welcome in this community. You are ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $1.9 million for financial damages and $3.5 million to Miss Ilara Vance for breach of contract and personal suffering. Liam's publicist stood up. On behalf of my client, we respectfully request denied. Security is escorting you out. 2 large men in black suits moved forward. They took Liam by the arms. He rose to his feet, his body rigid. He looked at the stage. Then, for the first time all night, he looked at me. Our eyes locked. I offered no expression. I didn't smirk. I didn't weep. I simply held his gaze until he looked away. He was escorted from the ballroom. The grand doors shut behind him with a heavy final thud. The MC continued. And now for Chloe Rain, in light of your complicity and the evidence provided, this board sentences you to a 5-year blacklist from any reputable establishment in this city. You will find employment difficult. Chloe stood pale and shaking. She gave a single jerky nod. She was led out a side door, refusing to look at anyone. Marcus and Isabella Ashford, you are each facing an 18-month suspension from the Chef's Guild for perjury and enabling fraud. You will cease all operations within 30 days. My former in-laws didn't flinch. Isabella was weeping, her face hidden in her hands. Marcus stared blankly ahead, his jaw clenched. David Chen, 3 years suspension from the Restaurant Association. You are permanently barred from any financial advisory roles in the culinary industry. David nodded slowly. He was led away. The MC closed his portfolio. This concludes the emergency hearing. The sound of 100 whispers filled the room. Outside, the January air beat through my coat. My friends, Nina and Oliver, walked on either side of me. Journalists yelled my name. Flashbulbs went off. I kept walking. I didn't give them a soundbite. And then I saw them. Liam's parents, standing by the valet next to a black town car. Isabella rushed forward, her face blotchy, her eyes puffy. Elara, darling. It was a dreadful misunderstanding. We had no idea he was being unfaithful. Please, if we could just... You had a year to believe me, I said. My voice was even, cold. I'd rehearsed this moment in my mind 1,000 times. You had a year to call me, to ask a single question, to doubt his perfect story. You chose not to. You chose him. That is a choice you will have to live with for the rest of your lives. Marcus stepped up. I'm sorry, we were mistaken. Can we please just talk? I looked at him, at both of them. I felt a complete void. Not rage, not sorrow, just a hollow space where my family used to be. No, I said. I walked right past them. Oliver and Nina followed. Nina gave me a quick glance. You good? I will be. 2 days later, I was in a glass-walled conference room at Nina's law firm. Oliver sat next to me. A thick stack of incorporation papers was on the table between us. Ashford Gastronomy Group is all yours, Oliver, I said. I signed the last page and pushed the stack across the polished mahogany. Oliver stared at the documents. Are you absolutely certain about this? I'm starting something new, I said. Something that belongs to me. Something without a tainted legacy. You deserve this company. You held it together when everyone else ran. You defended me when no one else dared. Make it something good. Oliver stood up and came around the table. He gave me a hug. It was unexpected. Oliver was not a hugger. Neither was I. Thank you, he whispered. Take good care of it, I replied. That night, I sat by myself in my new apartment watching the highlights on a food blogger's channel. Ashford's Empire Crumbles, Chef Blacklisted. There was footage of Liam being hustled out of the ballroom, footage of me walking past his parents without a word. I shut off the laptop. I sat in the quiet darkness and looked out at the city. The lights of San Francisco twinkled below me. The bay was a dark, shimmering expanse. The restaurants I had helped build were still there. It was done. So why did it feel like it was still so far from over? 1 year later, I got an email with a meeting request from a generic address. Subject, Liam Ashford. I stared at the message for 3 days. I left it on my screen. I minimized it. I brought it back up. I asked Nina what she thought. She said it was my decision alone. On the third day, I typed a reply. I wrote the name of a small cafe. Yes, the meeting place in the Mission District wasn't like our old life. Simple, quiet, but still a public space. 1 year later, I am a completely different woman. Recovered, but not without scars. I came here to find the definitive end. My new restaurant is on the second floor of a historic building in Hayes Valley. The sign reads Vance. Small, intimate, fiercely independent, 12 employees, a menu that changes weekly. On the wall behind the host stand hangs the Golden Gate Restaurant Association's Innovator of the Year award. I received it last month. Nina sent a card that read, You deserve this and so much more. Oliver sent white orchids, not for mourning, but to celebrate a fresh start. I am happiest at my prep station, creating again, making something beautiful from scratch. This time, no one can corrupt it. The choice to meet Liam took a week of consideration. Nina had said, You don't owe him anything. I answered, I know, I need this for me, a real ending. I took a cab across town to the Mission on a December afternoon. December. It had come full circle. The sky was a flat gray, a chilly wind blowing down the street. I sat at a small table for 5 minutes, my hands wrapped around a warm mug, breathing steadily. The cafe was small, with low lighting, the smell of coffee and pastries, the quiet murmur of conversation. The barista, a young woman with pink hair, called out a name. Liam. I looked up. Prisoner of his own making, table 7. I waited. Memories of our old life came rushing back. The smell of expensive wine, the clatter of silver, the hollow smiles of people who had lost their integrity. But this time I was an observer. This time I could leave whenever I wanted. The cafe wasn't a 5-star restaurant. Comfortable, neutral, but still a place with 4 walls. There were two rows of small tables, old artwork on the walls. I sat at table 7 and waited. The bell over the door chimed. Liam walked in. I almost didn't know him. His simple gray sweater was too big for his frame. He had lost at least 30 pounds. His cheeks were hollow, his shoulders slumped. Gray now peppered his hair at the temples. His hands shook as he sat down across from me. He couldn't meet my eyes. You came. His voice was raspy. I didn't think you would come. I almost didn't, I said. An awkward silence fell between us. Liam swallowed hard. Thank you. Don't thank me just yet. He looked down at his hands, the fingers that once wore a custom signet ring, now thin and bare. Ilara, I'm sorry. I know that word means nothing now. Sorry. I said nothing. I just waited. I've had a year to think, to really think. He took a shaky breath. I was jealous. Ever since we met in culinary school, you just had it. A better palate, more creativity. My father wanted a son to be a legend, but you were the real talent. I couldn't stand it. The pressure from my parents to be the best, it broke something inside me. His voice trembled. That's no excuse. I nearly destroyed three people's careers. I tried to destroy yours, he whispered, tears welling. I ruined our life. I ruined you. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I just needed you to hear me say it. I am sorry, truly, deeply sorry. I sat in silence for what felt like an eternity, watching him break down, watching the space between us. I felt no pity, I felt no rage. I just felt empty. Liam, I said, my voice steady, I came here to tell you one thing. He looked up, his eyes red rimmed. There will be no forgiveness. Not today, not ever. He flinched as if I had struck him. You didn't just take 3 years of my life, I went on. You took away my chance to be a mother. Liam looked up, completely bewildered. What? The stress, the trauma, the doctors were very clear. The complications from what you put me through. I lost the baby. I stared directly into his eyes. You took my family, our company, my peace of mind, and our child's future. You did it all while you looked me in the eye and told me you loved me. Liam shook his head, tears now falling freely. I I never knew. I didn't. I'm not forgiving you. I cut him off sharply. Forgiveness is for people who make mistakes. You made choices, cold, calculated choices. You chose your ego over integrity, your desires over our marriage, your pride over three people's livelihoods. I leaned forward, my voice as cold as the winter air outside. Choices have consequences. A ruined career is your consequence. Never forgiving you is mine. He looked at me as if I were a complete stranger. Do you hate me? I thought about it for a moment, then answered with the truth. No, I don't hate you anymore. Hate is an investment. I have nothing left to invest in you. You are just a man I used to know. I paused. The husband I thought I had was never real. He let out a shaky breath. My parents, they ask about you in their emails. I gave a bitter, humorless smile. Let's be very clear. Marcus and Isabella Ashford are nothing to me. I legally reverted to my maiden name 6 months ago. I am Elara Vance. I stopped. The Ashford culinary legacy ends with you. Oliver is rebranding the company name to preserve the business. That's the only thing left. I stood up. Goodbye, Liam. This is the last time you and I will ever speak. Wait, he said, rising slightly from his chair, his hands flat on the table. Are you happy? I considered his question. I'm building something new, something honest, mine, built on truth instead of secrets, so yes, I'm getting there. He nodded, tears streaming down his face. I'm glad you're choosing to be happy. My sister's voice on the phone was my anchor. I am, I said, then I hung up. Julian pressed his hand against the bedroom door he was standing outside of, his mouth open. I didn't hesitate. I walked straight to the front entrance. The doorman held the door. Will you be returning, Mrs. Vance? Never, I said. Driving to my sister's place, across town, my phone rang. Liam, how did it go? He asked gently. He was my lawyer, exactly as I needed. He was quiet for a moment. Clara, the initial offer is 18 million. It's the biggest I've seen for a non-contested split. I smiled, a bitter, hollow thing. You did it, Liam. I'm proud of you. Me too, he said. My life now looked like this. A guest room, 8 boxes of my belongings, small hopes for the future, no grand penthouse, no pressure, no heavy Vance name on my shoulders. Recently, I found the receipt that started it all, a $2,000 charge at the Clift Hotel for a suite I never saw, a charge that honored the death of our marriage. Robert, James, David. In my story, it was just one name, Simone. That's how I give back to myself, by remembering the truth. I'm seeing a therapist, a kind woman who specializes in relationship trauma. She's patient, not rushing. We haven't talked about the future, but maybe that's okay. I go to my OB/GYN appointments every week. Dr. Miller says I've made great progress in managing my stress. She asked how I felt about leaving Julian today. I said relieved. I don't contact his parents. They tried twice through their assistant. I declined both times. Some bridges should be turned to ash. My sister visits once a month with dinner. We laugh, we talk about the baby. She doesn't ask about him, she understands. People ask if I regret not trying to forgive. They say forgiveness is for yourself, not the other person. But I disagree. Refusing forgiveness is an act of self preservation. It's declaring that what you did was unacceptable. It's choosing to protect what's left of my heart. Some wounds don't heal, they scar. Some debts of trust can be repaid. And some people never deserve forgiveness. Tonight, I sit in my sister's spare room. My new project is an assembly manual for a baby crib. A place for my son, my family, a safe shelter just for us. I want his life flooded with light. I want it to be a place of hope. Working late, the city lights twinkling outside the window. The San Francisco skyline stretches out, shimmering like a promise. My phone rings, my sister just checking in. You okay? I'm okay. Really? Okay, good. Love you. Love you too. I hang up back to the instructions. The camera of my mind pulls away. The San Francisco skyline, me building a crib, a woman once shattered, now rebuilding herself one screw at a time. Some betrayals are permanent, some decisions define us forever. But survival, real survival, means deciding who gets to be in your life and who is shown the door, and living with that decision without apologizing to anyone. And to you listening to this story, remember this: the betrayal of a partner cuts deeper than any stranger's insult. I learned that the hard way. 3 times I prayed to God in that empty penthouse. Once on day one, crying into a silk pillow. Once on day two, when I thought I couldn't take another breath. And once on day three, asking not for Him to come back, but for the strength to leave. God didn't answer with miracles. He answered by giving me the will to survive. This kind of revenge is a double edged sword. I got my freedom. Julian is a bachelor again. His parents lost the daughter in law they adored. But the cost? I lost the family I thought I had. Was it worth it? Yes, because the truth mattered more than the beautiful lie of our marriage. Here's my advice: don't be like me. Don't wait for a receipt to tell you what your gut already knows. Don't let betrayal fester. Speak up at the first sign of disrespect. Set boundaries hard. Walk away from people who choose their ego over your heart, even if they share your bed. Forgiveness is optional. Self respect is not. I spent 3 days planning my escape because I had nothing else. You don't have to. Learn from my mistakes. Trust your intuition, verify your suspicions, and never let anyone, partner or not, steal your voice. One more thing: this betrayal taught me that family isn't a marriage license, it's loyalty. It's my sister who opened her home without question. It's my friends who had my back. It's my lawyer who believed me when Julian called me crazy. Build your family from people who choose you every single day. If this story moved you, if it made you think about your own boundaries, your own relationships, your own fight, leave a comment below. Tell me, would you forgive or would you walk away? Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more raw, real, powerful stories about survival, justice, and second chances, subscribe to this channel. Hit that notification bell because the next story it's even bigger. Thank you for staying until the end. I know this was heavy, I know it was long, but you stuck with me. That means something. A word of caution before we go: the stories ahead contain fictionalized elements crafted for educational and reflective purposes. If intense themes of betrayal, marital conflict, or emotional distress aren't for you, feel free to explore other content that better suits your needs. Take care of yourself first. Until next time, stay strong, stay honest, and never apologize for protecting your peace.